Welcome, weary traveler, to a gentle journey through the hidden corners of the wizarding world, where the smallest beings possess the greatest magic. Tonight, we explore the ancient and noble history of house elves, creatures whose loyalty runs deeper than ocean trenches, whose magic flows purer than mountain springs, and whose stories have been whispered in the shadows of grand manors and castle kitchens for over 1,000 years. Close your eyes and let these tales of service, sacrifice, and quiet heroism carry you into peaceful slumber, where even the most devoted servants finally find rest. In the mists of time, before parchment recorded the deeds of wizards or quills scratched the first laws of magical governance, there existed a world where magic flowed as freely as mountain streams and creatures of power roamed forests that knew no master's call. Deep within these primordial woodlands, where ancient oaks stretched their limbs towards stars that had witnessed the birth of magic itself, dwelled a people whose very essence was woven from the threads of pure enchantment. These were the wild elves, beings whose existence predated the rise of wizarding civilization by millennia uncounted. The wild elves of those distant ages bore little resemblance to the diminutive servants that would later grace the halls of magical houses. They stood tall as saplings, their forms graceful and proud, their eyes holding depths that reflected the wisdom of centuries spent in communion with magic in its rawest form. Their ears, though large and sensitive like their descendants, were not marks of servility but instruments of incredible perception, capable of detecting the subtle harmonies that governed the natural world's magical currents. In those forgotten days, when the world was younger and magic more wild, these elves built cities that defied the very notion of architecture as humans would come to understand it. Their settlements were grown rather than constructed, coaxed from living trees and singing stones, shaped by will and wish rather than hammer and nail. Towers of crystal that hummed with stored starlight spiraled toward the heavens, while underground chambers carved from single enormous roots housed libraries where knowledge was preserved not in books but in the living memory of trees themselves. The wild elves possessed magic that flowed through their beings like blood through veins, requiring no wands or incantations to manifest their will upon the world. They could speak with the wind and receive answers, could call rain from cloudless skies or bid flowers bloom in the depths of winter. Their apparition was not the violent crack and pop that would later characterize wizarding transportation, but a gentle fading, like mist dispersing before the morning sun, only to reform wherever their hearts desired to be. Their society was ancient beyond human comprehension, built upon principles that valued harmony with the natural world, above dominion over it. They were gardeners of the wild places, tenders of magical creatures, keepers of secrets that touched the very foundations of existence. Each elf was bound not to masters or houses but to the land itself, their magic flowing in perfect synchronization with the rhythms of earth and sky, season and storm. But even in that age of wonder, change stirred like seeds in fertile soil. The first humans to discover magic were crude practitioners compared to the elegant artistry of elvish spellwork, yet they possessed something the elves had never developed: ambition that burned like flame, desire that could reshape the world through sheer force of will. Where elves worked with magic, these early wizards sought to master it, to bend it to purposes that served not nature but themselves. The first encounters between wild elves and primitive wizard kind were tentative affairs, marked more by curiosity than conflict. Elves, with their deep wells of compassion and their instinctive desire to nurture all living things, saw in these magical humans a species struggling to understand forces beyond their natural comprehension. What harm could there be in offering guidance to beings whose magical abilities were so clearly inferior to their own? What danger could possibly arise from teaching elementary enchantments to creatures who could barely maintain a simple lighting charm? The early relationships were symbiotic in nature, with elves providing magical instruction and protection in exchange for human innovation and adaptability. Wizards, despite their crude magical techniques, possessed an inventiveness that fascinated elvish minds accustomed to working within natural limitations. They created tools where elves would have grown them, built structures where elves would have cultivated them, approached magic as a problem to be solved rather than a harmony to be joined. For several centuries, this arrangement flourished in ways that benefited both species. Elves learned to appreciate the surprising creativity that came from human limitations, while wizards gained access to magical knowledge that would have taken them millennia to develop independently. The first magical contracts were written during this period, agreements that formalized the protection elves provided and the services wizards offered in return. These contracts, inscribed on vellum made from leaves that never died and written in ink distilled from moonbeams, were works of art that few modern wizards could comprehend, let alone replicate. They established principles of mutual respect and benefit, created frameworks for cooperation that acknowledged the superior magical abilities of elves while recognizing the unique contributions that human innovation could provide. Most importantly, they were agreements between equals, partnerships rather than bonds of servitude. But the nature of power is that it seeks always to expand, and the nature of ambition is that it is never satisfied with equality when dominance might be achieved. As wizard society grew more sophisticated and their magical abilities improved through elvish tutelage, some began to question why beings with such inferior magical power should be bound by agreements that treated them as equals to creatures whose abilities so clearly surpassed their own. The transformation was gradual, so subtle that even the wisest elves failed to recognize the danger until it was too late. Requests for magical assistance became expectations of service. Partnerships evolved into dependencies. Contracts that had been written as agreements between allies were reinterpreted as bonds of obligation that could be passed from one generation to the next like inherited property. The Great Binding, as it came to be known in the whispered legends that survived in the deepest archives of elvish memory, was not a single event, but a process that unfolded over generations. It began with individual elves choosing to remain with wizarding families who had shown them particular kindness, preferring the company of their human partners to returning to forests that seemed increasingly distant from the centers of magical learning and innovation. These elves, the first to accept permanent residence in human homes, were not servants but advisors, their magical expertise essential to the proper functioning of early wizarding households. They helped establish the domestic magic that would later be taken for granted. Spells that kept food fresh without preservation. Enchantments that maintained perfect temperature, regardless of weather. Protective wards that could defend against both magical and mundane threats. Their children, born into households where magic flowed from both elvish and human sources, grew up seeing service not as degradation, but as purpose. They learned their parents' domestic enchantments as naturally as young wizards learned their first levitation charms, developing techniques that elevated household management to high magical art. In helping their human families, they found satisfaction and meaning that wild forests could no longer provide. But with each generation, the balance of power shifted incrementally toward the wizarding families who controlled resources, properties, and increasingly, the very definition of what constituted proper magical society. Elves who had once been partners became dependents, their access to the wider wizarding world mediated entirely through their human associates. They remained powerful, certainly, but their power was channeled exclusively through domestic applications that served their hosts' needs. The wild elf cities, deprived of their most innovative members, began a slow decline that would span centuries. Without the constant renewal that came from interaction with dynamic human civilization, Elvish society became increasingly insular and conservative, focused more on preserving ancient ways than on adapting to a changing world. Their crystal towers dimmed and cracked as fewer elves returned with new knowledge to feed their stored enchantments. Their root libraries withered as the trees that housed them lost connection with the broader currents of magical development. Archaeological evidence of these lost civilizations can still be found by those who know where to look and possess the sensitivity to detect traces of magic so ancient that it has soaked into the very stones of the earth. In remote valleys where human feet have rarely trod, careful excavation reveals foundation circles where the greatest Elvish cities once stood. The stones are smooth and warm to the touch, still holding echoes of the songs that shaped them from raw rock into architectural marvels. Ancient runes carved into these foundation stones tell stories that conventional magical education has never preserved. They speak of the Sundering, when the last great Elvish city closed its gates to the outside world, rather than watch its people drain away to serve in human homes. They record the choosing, when the remaining wild elves made the conscious decision to retreat so far into untamed wilderness that no wizard would ever find them, abandoning their domesticated kin to whatever fate awaited them in human hands. The runes also preserve fragments of the original contracts, magical agreements so sophisticated that modern wizarding law cannot fully interpret their provisions. These contracts reveal that the early relationships between elves and wizards were far more complex than the simple master-servant arrangements that would later develop. They included clauses for shared magical research, provisions for elvish representation in early wizarding governing bodies, and most tellingly, specific protections for elvish cultural autonomy and the right to withdraw from agreements that ceased to serve both parties' interests. That these protections were gradually eroded through reinterpretation and legal manipulation rather than direct violation speaks to the sophisticated understanding of magical law that early wizarding families possessed. Each generation of contracts became slightly more favorable to human interests. Each revision introduced language that strengthened wizarding authority while maintaining the fiction of voluntary cooperation. The transformation was so gradual that even elves with centuries of experience failed to recognize how completely their position had been undermined until the process was irreversible. The role of early wizarding families in shaping elvish destiny cannot be understated, though their motivations were complex and often contradictory. Many genuinely cared for their elvish partners and sought to protect them from the dangers of a changing world where wild magic was increasingly seen as primitive and potentially threatening. They offered security, purpose, and continued access to the magical community that was becoming the center of all meaningful magical development. But protection, however well-intentioned, that requires the surrender of agency, inevitably becomes indistinguishable from captivity. The elvish families who accepted integration into human households traded freedom for security, independence for purpose, and in doing so, established precedents that would define their species' role in wizarding society for the next 1,000 years. The great irony of this transformation is that it was made possible by the very qualities that made elves so valuable as partners in the first place. Their deep capacity for loyalty, their instinctive desire to nurture and protect, their genuine pleasure in using their abilities to help others. All of these admirable traits became mechanisms for their own subjugation once the balance of power shifted decisively in favor of their human associates, as the last wild elf cities faded into legend, and the domesticated populations became fully integrated into wizarding households. A new kind of magic began to emerge from the bonds that connected elf to family. This was not the free-flowing natural enchantment of the ancient forests, but something more focused and purposeful, magic that gained power through dedication to specific people and places, rather than abstract principles of natural harmony. The magical signature of this bonded service was unlike anything that had existed before, creating connections that transcended normal magical laws and enabled feats that even the most powerful wizards could not replicate. An elf bound to a family could appear instantly at any member's call, could sense their needs before they were expressed, could channel protection spells, with an intensity born from genuine emotional investment in their charge's welfare. But this same bonding magic that made house elves so valuable also made them increasingly dependent on their connections to wizarding families for magical stability and emotional fulfillment. The wild magic that had once sustained their ancestors was replaced by a more constrained but also more focused power that flowed through the channels of service and dedication. To break these bonds was not just to lose employment, but to risk losing access to the magical forces that had become essential to their very existence. Thus were the proud, wild elves of the primordial forests transformed into the devoted house elves of wizarding legend, their power undiminished but redirected, their independence exchanged for security, their ancient freedom traded for purpose that would define their species for generations yet to come. The transformation was so complete that within a few centuries, the very existence of wild elves passed from memory into myth, leaving only their domesticated descendants to carry forward whatever remained of their ancestors' noble heritage. In the deepest foundations of the oldest magical houses, where stones still warm with absorbed enchantment and shadows hold echoes of ancient songs, the memory of what was lost lingers like perfume in an empty room. Those sensitive to such traces can sometimes feel the weight of vanished greatness, the ghost presence of a people who once shaped the world with nothing but will and wish, before they chose to shape smaller worlds with dedication and love. The magical bond that connects a house elf to their wizarding family transcends ordinary understanding of enchantment, representing a form of magic so ancient and fundamental that even the most learned scholars struggle to comprehend its true nature. This connection flows deeper than blood, stronger than steel, more enduring than stone, creating pathways between souls that allow emotions, intentions, and even physical sensations to pass between master and servant with startling immediacy. When a house elf is first bound to a family, the magical transformation begins at the cellular level, rewriting the very essence of their being to accommodate new channels of power and purpose. Their magical core, which once drew sustenance from connection to natural forces, gradually adapts to receive nourishment from the satisfaction of service rendered and appreciation received. This shift is not violent but gradual, like a river slowly carving a new course through willing earth, creating permanent changes that become as natural as breathing. The binding manifests differently in each elf, reflecting both their individual magical signatures and the particular needs of the families they serve. Some develop enhanced sensitivity to emotional states, capable of detecting distress or happiness from rooms away, their magic automatically responding to ease suffering or amplify joy. Others find their power flowing most strongly through protective enchantments, creating invisible shields around their charges that deflect both physical and magical harm with supernatural efficiency. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the bond is how it enables house elves to perform magic that should theoretically be impossible given the constraints under which they operate. Without wands to focus their power, without formal training in spell work, without access to the theoretical frameworks that support advanced magical education, they routinely accomplish feats that would challenge experienced wizards. Their apparition alone defies conventional magical law, allowing them to travel instantly across vast distances while carrying loads that should make such transportation impossible. This wandless magic flows through channels that exist outside traditional magical theory, drawing power not from learned techniques but from emotional connection and dedicated purpose. When a house elf cooks a meal, they are not simply following recipes but channeling love, care, and genuine desire to nourish into every ingredient, every stir, every moment of preparation. The result transcends mere sustenance, becoming food that can comfort grief, strengthen resolve, or heal wounds that medicine cannot touch. The complexity of these magical bonds becomes apparent when examining how different families inspire different types of loyalty in their elves. Gentle masters who treat their elves with kindness and respect often find their servants developing magic that emphasizes protection and comfort, creating homes that feel safe and welcoming to all who enter. The spells woven into such households run deep and subtle, turning ordinary spaces into sanctuaries where stress dissolves and peace settles over inhabitants like warm blankets. Conversely, families that rule through fear and intimidation discover that their elves' magic takes on darker characteristics, focusing more on concealment and defense than comfort and nurture. These elves become masters of hiding evidence, of making problems disappear, of ensuring that their master's secrets remain buried, no matter what moral compromises such loyalty might require. Their magic grows sharp and precise, efficient rather than warm, effective rather than loving. The psychological dimensions of Elvish servitude reveal layers of complexity that challenge simple assumptions about freedom and oppression. Many house elves genuinely find fulfillment in their roles, their magical nature apparently requiring purpose and structure in ways that complete independence cannot satisfy. They take pride in excellence, joy in appreciation, and deep satisfaction in being essential to the smooth functioning of households that depend entirely on their invisible labor. This contentment is not merely the result of magical compulsion, but reflects genuine compatibility between elvish psychology and domestic service, provided that service is rendered to worthy recipients who appreciate the gifts they receive. House elves possess an innate understanding of what creates harmony in living spaces, what combinations of comfort, efficiency, and beauty transform mere buildings into true homes. Their magic flows most freely when applied to these domestic arts, suggesting that their deepest nature is aligned with creation and nurturing rather than destruction or dominance. The clothing magic that governs elf liberation represents one of the most fascinating aspects of their bondage, a rule so specific and seemingly arbitrary that it must have originated in the deepest levels of magical law rather than human invention. The simple act of receiving clothing from their master's hand breaks bonds that can withstand the most powerful unbinding spells, suggesting that freedom was always meant to remain possible, encoded into the very structure of the servitude itself. This liberation mechanism appears to operate on principles of gift-giving that predate recorded magical law, drawing upon concepts of reciprocity and mutual respect that exist in the fundamental architecture of magical reality. When clothing is given freely, without coercion or trickery, it represents acknowledgement of the elf's personhood, recognition that they are beings capable of independent existence rather than mere extensions of their master's will. The magic responds to this recognition instantly and irreversibly, severing connections that have existed for generations with simple grace. Yet the aftermath of liberation often proves more complex than the act itself, as house elves struggle to adapt to freedoms they may never have desired or requested. Their magic, so long channeled through bonds of service, must find new outlets and purposes, a transition that can prove as traumatic as it is liberating. Some freed elves discover that their powers diminish without the emotional anchors that domestic service provided, leaving them weaker and less capable than they were while bound. The phenomenon of self-punishment among house elves reveals the depths of psychological integration between their sense of self-worth and their effectiveness as servants. When they perceive themselves as having failed in their duties, their magic turns inward, manifesting as compulsions toward physical harm that serve both as penance and as release valve for energies that have nowhere else to flow. This behavior horrifies observers but serves essential functions within the psychological framework of Elvish bondage. The self-harm is not sadistic but ritualistic, serving to restore balance within the elves' magical and emotional systems after perceived failure has disrupted their internal harmony. Like a magical circuit breaker, it prevents more serious psychological damage by providing a controlled outlet for self-directed anger and disappointment. The severity of the punishment typically corresponds to the magnitude of the perceived failure, creating a proportional response system that helps elves process guilt and return to effective functioning. Understanding this behavior requires recognizing that house elves experience failure not as simple disappointment, but as fundamental disruption of their magical equilibrium. Their power flows through channels of dedication and success. When those channels are blocked by perceived inadequacy, the magical energy must find alternative outlets, or risk causing internal damage that could prove permanently disabling. Self-punishment provides that outlet while simultaneously demonstrating the elf's commitment to higher standards of performance. Different types of elf families have developed various approaches to managing these self-punishment episodes, reflecting both their understanding of elf psychology and their fundamental attitudes toward their servants' well-being. Compassionate families learn to intervene early, providing reassurance and alternative tasks that restore the elf's sense of competence before self-harm becomes necessary. They understand that preventing the conditions that trigger punishment episodes is far more effective than simply forbidding the behavior itself. More manipulative families sometimes exploit their elves' punishment compulsions, using guilt and perceived failure as tools for controlling behavior and ensuring complete obedience. They understand that an elf who fears disappointing their master will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid failure, making punishment episodes into powerful motivational tools that can shape behavior more effectively than any direct command or threat. The generational transmission of Elvish servitude creates dynasties of dedication that span centuries, with each elf generation learning their duties from parents who learned from their own parents in unbroken chains of domestic expertise stretching back to the original binding contracts. These families develop specialized knowledge and techniques that become closely guarded secrets, passed down through demonstrated competence rather than formal instruction. Young elves absorb not only practical skills but also emotional attitudes towards service, learning to find satisfaction in tasks that might seem menial to outside observers. They discover pride in invisible excellence, joy in anticipating needs before they are expressed, and deep fulfillment in being essential to the happiness and comfort of the families they serve. This education shapes their magical development, encouraging powers that support domestic excellence while discouraging abilities that might promote independence or questioning of their assigned roles. The regional variations in house elf treatment across different magical cultures reveal how local customs and values influence the expression of the fundamental master-servant bond. In some areas, elves are treated almost as family members, their opinions sought on household matters, and their personal needs carefully considered alongside those of their masters. These elves often develop magic that emphasizes cooperation and mutual support, creating households where the distinction between servant and served becomes blurred through genuine affection and respect. Other regions maintain stricter hierarchical distinctions, viewing house elves as valuable property whose well-being matters only insofar as it affects their efficiency and longevity. These environments produce elves whose magic focuses on invisibility and efficiency, creatures who can accomplish extraordinary tasks while remaining completely unnoticed by anyone other than their direct masters. Their loyalty runs just as deep as their more cherished counterparts, but it expresses itself through perfect service rather than emotional connection. The pure-blood families who have maintained house elf dynasties for centuries often develop complex relationships with their servants that transcend simple employment or ownership. These elves become repositories of family history, keepers of secrets that span generations, witnesses to private moments that no outsider could ever observe. Their loyalty is tested not just through daily service, but through their discretion in handling information that could destroy reputations or unmake political alliances if it ever became public knowledge. The magical oaths that bind such elves to silence are among the most sophisticated enchantments in existence, more complex than the unbreakable vows that wizards fear, and more enduring than the protective charms that guard the most precious artifacts. These spells weave themselves into the very fabric of the elf's being, making betrayal not just impossible, but literally inconceivable, as the magic prevents them from even forming thoughts that could lead to revelation of protected information. Yet within these constraints, house elves find ways to maintain their own identity and dignity, developing subtle forms of resistance that never technically violate their bonds but express their fundamental personhood. They take pride in accomplishing tasks in ways that reflect their own creativity and skill rather than simply following orders mechanically. They form friendships with other elves that provide emotional support and shared understanding of their unique position in magical society. The magic that flows through house elf communities creates networks of communication and mutual aid that operate completely outside their master's knowledge or control. An elf facing particular challenges can draw upon the collective wisdom and experience of their peers, receiving advice and support that helps them navigate difficult situations while maintaining their essential loyalty to their families. These networks preserve elvish culture and identity, even within the constraints of domestic service, ensuring that something essentially elvish survives and flourishes despite centuries of subjugation. The paradox of powerful magic constrained by simple rules reveals fundamental truths about the nature of magical law and the relationship between power and responsibility. House elves possess abilities that exceed those of many trained wizards, yet they channel these gifts exclusively through service to others, rather than personal advancement or individual expression. This limitation is not weakness, but a different kind of strength, demonstrating that true power lies not in domination but in dedication to purposes larger than oneself. Their magic teaches profound lessons about the relationship between constraint and creativity, showing how limitations can focus power rather than diminishing it. Like streams that carve deeper channels when confined between narrow banks, elvish magic gains intensity and precision through the very bonds that restrict its application. The result is enchantment of extraordinary subtlety and effectiveness. Magic that accomplishes impossibly complex tasks through mechanisms so elegant they seem effortless to outside observers. In the late 10th century, when the 4 greatest witches and wizards of their age gathered to establish a school that would preserve magical knowledge for future generations, one founder brought with her a vision that extended far beyond academic instruction. Helga Hufflepuff, whose gentle wisdom matched her formidable magical abilities, understood that creating a castle capable of housing and feeding hundreds of students would require more than architectural brilliance or protective enchantments. It would demand a workforce whose dedication matched their magical capabilities, creatures whose very nature aligned with the nurturing and sustaining of others. The decision to invite house elves to Hogwarts was not born from convenience or economy, but from Hufflepuff's profound understanding of both elvish nature and educational necessity. She had witnessed firsthand how house elves transformed ordinary dwellings into sanctuaries of comfort and efficiency, had observed their almost supernatural ability to anticipate needs and provide solutions before problems could fully manifest. More importantly, she recognized that the isolation many elves experienced in private households, serving single families with limited social contact, represented a waste of their considerable talents and a barrier to their psychological well-being. Hufflepuff's approach to recruitment was revolutionary for its time, conducted through personal visits to elvish communities rather than negotiations with their wizarding masters. She understood that true voluntary service required genuine choice, that elves who came to Hogwarts must do so because they embraced the school's mission rather than because they had been commanded or sold. Her gentle manner and obvious respect for elvish dignity attracted volunteers from across Britain, creatures who saw in her offer not just employment, but purpose worthy of their extraordinary abilities. The first group of house elves to enter Hogwarts numbered exactly 13, a number that Hufflepuff selected for its magical significance and its practical implications for establishing sustainable kitchen operations. Each elf had been chosen not only for their culinary skills, but for their ability to work harmoniously with others, their emotional stability under pressure, and their genuine enthusiasm for the educational mission they would be supporting. They represented various elvish family traditions, bringing diverse techniques and specialties that would blend into the comprehensive magical cuisine Hogwarts required. The establishment of the Great Hall kitchens began with magic so complex and beautiful that even the other founders gathered to witness its casting. Hufflepuff worked for 7 days and 7 nights, weaving spells that would transform cold stone chambers beneath the castle into warm, living spaces where cooking became high art and nourishment transcended mere sustenance. The enchantments she wove drew power not just from her considerable abilities but from the willing participation of the elves themselves, their magic flowing into the very walls and foundations to create facilities that would serve the school for centuries to come. The kitchen complex that emerged from this collaborative magical effort defied conventional understanding of space and physics, containing rooms that were larger inside than their external dimensions should have allowed, storage areas that preserved ingredients in perfect condition regardless of their natural preservation requirements, and cooking surfaces that could be heated to any temperature instantly, while remaining cool to the touch wherever safety required. The central hearth, large enough to roast whole sides of beef yet precise enough to simmer delicate sauces, became the heart around which all other kitchen activities revolved. But the true innovation lay not in the physical facilities but in the magical systems that connected kitchen to Great Hall, allowing food to appear instantly upon the tables above while maintaining perfect temperature and presentation. This transportation magic required unprecedented coordination between elvish and human magical signatures, creating hybrid enchantments that drew power from both sources while remaining stable enough to function reliably meal after meal, year after year, century after century. Hufflepuff's revolutionary collective service model recognized that house elves, despite their individual power and competence, achieved their greatest effectiveness when working in harmonious groups where their diverse talents could complement and amplify each other. Rather than assigning each elf to serve specific students or professors, she created a system where all elves served the school as a whole, their individual responsibilities shifting and adapting based on need, season, and the natural evolution of their abilities and interests. This approach required careful attention to elvish social dynamics and individual personalities, ensuring that collaboration enhanced rather than constrained each elf's unique contributions. Hufflepuff spent countless hours observing how different elves worked together, identifying natural partnerships and complementary skills, gradually developing organizational structures that maximized both efficiency and job satisfaction. The hierarchy that emerged was based not on arbitrary authority, but on genuine expertise and natural leadership abilities. The position of head cook, eventually filled by an elf known simply as Founder's Friend, represented the pinnacle of kitchen authority while remaining fundamentally collaborative in nature. This elf coordinated meal planning and ingredient procurement, resolved disputes between kitchen workers, and served as primary liaison with castle administration. But their authority derived from respect earned through competence, rather than power imposed through position. The role rotated periodically, allowing different elves to develop leadership skills while preventing any individual from becoming isolated by permanent authority. Specialized roles within the kitchen hierarchy reflected both the complexity of feeding hundreds of people daily and the diverse talents that different elves brought to their work. Master bakers developed breads and pastries that could satisfy dietary requirements ranging from standard human nutrition to the exotic needs of visiting magical creatures. Sauce specialists created gravies and accompaniments that enhanced rather than masked the natural flavors of ingredients, their work requiring such precise timing and temperature control that even experienced human cooks could rarely match their consistency. The feast coordinators represented perhaps the most challenging specialization, responsible for the elaborate meals that marked special occasions and seasonal celebrations. These elves needed not only exceptional culinary skills but also creative vision capable of transforming simple ingredients into presentations worthy of the most sophisticated wizarding palates. They worked months in advance on major feasts, developing themes and coordinating elements that would create memorable experiences while accommodating the practical constraints of serving large numbers simultaneously. The integration of house elf operations with the other founders' household management needs required diplomatic skills that Hufflepuff possessed in abundance, but which proved challenging for some of her colleagues to appreciate fully. Godric Gryffindor, whose preference for direct action sometimes clashed with the subtle approaches that elves favored, initially struggled to understand why his requests for immediate changes to meal schedules or menu modifications often met with polite but firm resistance from kitchen staff. The elves' insistence on proper planning and preparation time was not obstinacy but professional necessity, reflecting their understanding that quality could not be rushed and that their reputation for excellence depended on maintaining standards that hasty modifications might compromise. Hufflepuff served as translator and mediator, helping her fellow founders appreciate that elvish willingness to serve did not mean willingness to perform miracles on demand or to sacrifice quality for convenience. Rowena Ravenclaw's intellectual curiosity led her to spend considerable time in the kitchens, studying the magical techniques that elves employed and comparing them to theoretical frameworks she had developed for understanding magical energy flow and application. Her observations contributed to several innovations in food preservation and preparation that enhanced both nutritional value and flavor, while the elves' practical demonstrations helped refine her theories about wandless magic and emotional enchantment. Salazar Slytherin's relationship with the house elves proved most complex, reflecting his complicated attitudes toward magical creatures and non-human intelligence. He respected their abilities and appreciated their contributions to castle operations, but he maintained careful emotional distance that prevented the warm relationships his colleagues developed. The elves, with their intuitive understanding of personality and motivation, adapted their interactions with him accordingly, providing efficient service without attempting the personal connections they formed with other faculty members. The development of elf-specific magical tools and equipment represented a collaborative effort between Hufflepuff's theoretical knowledge and the practical expertise of her elvish colleagues. Traditional wizarding cooking implements proved inadequate for the precision and scale that castle operations required, necessitating creation of specialized devices that could amplify elvish magical abilities while remaining comfortable and efficient to use. The great ladles, carved from heartwood of trees that had grown in soil blessed by ancient fertility magic, could stir cauldrons large enough to bathe in while maintaining perfect temperature distribution and preventing any ingredient from sticking or burning. The measuring cups, crafted from crystal that had been grown rather than carved, could expand or contract to provide exactly the right amount of any ingredient, their magical properties ensuring that proportions remained perfect, regardless of recipe size or scaling requirements. Perhaps most ingenious were the taste testers, small silver spoons that could sample dishes and provide immediate feedback about flavor balance, seasoning levels, and cooking progress. These devices prevented the waste that would occur if large batches had to be discarded due to seasoning errors, while ensuring that quality control remained consistent even when multiple elves were working on the same dish. Simultaneously, the establishment of elf quarters beneath the castle required as much magical innovation as the kitchen facilities, creating living spaces that honored elvish preferences for warmth, coziness, and community, while providing the privacy and personal space that individual dignity required. Hufflepuff understood that elves who felt valued and comfortable would provide better service than those who were merely housed adequately, and she invested significant time and magic in creating residential areas that felt like homes rather than dormitories. The common hearth served as the social center of elvish life, a warm, circular room where cooking fires burned perpetually and comfortable seating encouraged conversation and relaxation after work hours. Here, elves could share meals together, exchange stories and techniques, celebrate personal milestones, and maintain the social connections that were essential to their psychological well-being. The room's magical properties enhanced camaraderie while dampening conflicts, creating an atmosphere where disagreements could be discussed and resolved without escalating into serious disputes. Individual quarters, though smaller than human accommodations, were designed with careful attention to elvish preferences for enclosed, secure spaces that could be personalized through decoration and arrangement. Each room included storage for personal possessions, sleeping areas that could be adjusted for individual comfort preferences, and small workspaces where elves could pursue personal hobbies or practice specialized techniques during their off-duty hours. The integration of elvish living areas with castle infrastructure required magical engineering that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in 10th century wizarding architecture. Ventilation systems carried fresh air throughout the underground complex, while maintaining perfect temperature control. Water supplies provided both hot and cold options instantly, drawn from deep springs that had been enhanced with purification magic. Waste disposal systems removed all organic matter instantly and completely, maintaining sanitation standards that exceeded those found in many wizarding homes of the period. The magical cooking innovations that emerged from this collaboration between Hufflepuff's vision and elvish expertise revolutionized not just Hogwarts dining but magical cuisine throughout Britain. Techniques developed in the castle kitchens gradually spread to other magical households, raising standards and expectations while demonstrating new possibilities for combining magical and mundane cooking methods. The ever-fresh preservation method, which maintained ingredients in perfect condition indefinitely without affecting their natural properties, eliminated waste while ensuring that seasonal specialties could be enjoyed year-round. This technique proved particularly valuable for exotic ingredients that were difficult to obtain regularly, allowing the kitchens to maintain consistent menu quality regardless of supply chain disruptions or seasonal availability. Temperature layering, a technique that allowed different parts of the same dish to be maintained at optimal temperatures simultaneously, enabled the creation of complex presentations that had previously been impossible. Hot soups could be served with chilled garnishes, frozen desserts could be accompanied by warm sauces, and elaborate multi-course meals could be prepared entirely in advance, without any component losing its ideal serving temperature. The flavor harmony enchantments represented perhaps the most sophisticated innovation, magical processes that enhanced the natural complementarity of ingredients while preventing any single flavor from overwhelming others. These spells required deep understanding of both magical theory and culinary art, producing results that satisfied even the most discriminating palates, while ensuring that nutritional value was enhanced rather than diminished by magical intervention. The success of Hufflepuff's Elvish recruitment and integration program established precedents that would influence magical education for centuries to come, demonstrating that excellence in teaching required excellence in all supporting operations. The house elves who chose to serve Hogwarts became partners in the educational mission, their work creating the stable, nurturing environment that allowed students to focus on learning rather than basic survival needs. Their dedication extended far beyond simple food service, encompassing all aspects of castle maintenance and operation that affected student welfare. They repaired damaged furnishings before anyone noticed the problems, maintained perfect cleanliness in all common areas, and provided countless small services that made daily life more pleasant and productive for everyone in the castle community. But perhaps their greatest contribution was demonstrating that service freely given and gratefully received created bonds stronger than any magical compulsion, that respect and appreciation could inspire loyalty more enduring than fear or obligation. The house elves of Hogwarts became living examples of Hufflepuff's core belief that everyone had valuable contributions to make, that dignity came not from position or power, but from dedication to worthy purposes shared with others who appreciated their efforts. The legacy of Helga Hufflepuff's compassionate recruitment would echo through the centuries, as generation after generation of house elves chose to continue their family's service to the school that had welcomed their ancestors, not as property or tools, but as valued partners in the great work of magical education. Their magic, freely given and joyfully applied, became part of the castle's fundamental character, creating the warmth and welcome that would make Hogwarts feel like home to countless students who arrived as strangers and left as family. The grand manor houses of Wizarding Britain stood like monuments to centuries of magical tradition, their ancient stones steeped in power and privilege that had been carefully cultivated through generations of pure-blood dynasties. Within these sprawling estates, where portraits whispered secrets and ghosts walked familiar halls, house elves moved through shadows and service, their lives intertwined with the fortunes and follies of families whose names commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout magical society. Number 12. Grimmauld Place, ancestral home of the most ancient and noble House of Black, exemplified the darkest traditions of pure-blood house elf ownership, its very walls seeming to absorb the cruelty and contempt that had been directed toward generations of elvish servants. The house itself was a reflection of its owner's values, decorated with the severed heads of house elves, who had served the family faithfully for decades before being mounted like hunting trophies. When age or infirmity made them no longer useful for active service. The Black family tradition regarding their house elves was built upon principles of absolute dominance and casual cruelty that reflected their broader attitudes toward all beings they considered inferior. House elves in the Black household were not partners or even valued servants, but possessions to be used, abused, and discarded according to their owner's whims. The psychological torture they endured was systematic and deliberate, designed not merely to ensure obedience but to break their spirits so completely that resistance became literally unthinkable. Kreacher, the last house elf to serve the Black family before their line effectively ended, bore the accumulated trauma of centuries of such treatment, his personality twisted by decades of casual violence and deliberate humiliation. His fierce loyalty to his mistress was not born from affection, but from the desperate need to find meaning in service that had stripped away every other source of self-worth. The dark artifacts that filled the house spoke to him more clearly than human voices, their malevolent whispers offering validation that his master's explicit contempt denied. The Black family's approach to house elf discipline went beyond simple punishment to encompass psychological warfare designed to ensure that their servants never forgot their place in the household hierarchy. Elves were forced to refer to themselves in the most degrading terms, to sleep in cupboards that were deliberately kept cold and uncomfortable, to eat scraps that were often spoiled or insufficient to maintain proper health. These practices were not born from economic necessity, but from philosophical commitment to maintaining absolute power over creatures whose magical abilities far exceeded those of their tormentors. Malfoy Manor represented a different but equally destructive approach to house elf ownership, one that emphasized intimidation and the constant threat of violence, rather than the casual cruelty that characterized the Black household. Lucius Malfoy understood that fear could be a more effective tool than actual violence, creating an atmosphere where house elves lived in constant anticipation of punishment that might never come but which seemed always imminent. Dobby's years of service to the Malfoy family demonstrated how psychological terrorism could be refined into an art form, with every interaction designed to reinforce the elf's helplessness and dependence, while maintaining the fiction that such treatment was normal and deserved. The family's public facade of respectability made their private cruelty more insidious, as Dobby had no frame of reference that would allow him to recognize his treatment as abnormal or unjustified. The Malfoy approach to house elf management reflected their broader political philosophy, viewing cruelty not as an end in itself, but as a tool for maintaining social order and reinforcing hierarchical relationships. They understood that terrorizing their house elf served multiple purposes beyond simple dominance, demonstrating their power to visiting Death Eaters while providing a safe outlet for violent impulses that could not be expressed against equals without consequences. The elaborate punishments that Dobby inflicted upon himself whenever he failed to meet his master's expectations or violated their explicit commands revealed the sophisticated psychological conditioning that the Malfoys had employed to ensure perfect obedience without constant supervision. By training their elf to punish himself more severely than they ever would, they created a system of control that operated independently of their presence, while ensuring that resistance remained impossible, even in private moments. The Crouch family's relationship with their house elf Winky demonstrated how even well-intentioned masters could create destructive dynamics through paternalistic attitudes that denied their servants basic dignity while claiming to protect their welfare. Barty Crouch Sr.'s treatment of Winky reflected his broader approach to law enforcement, emphasizing order and control above compassion or understanding. viewing kindness as weakness that could be exploited by those who lacked proper respect for authority. Winky's tragic devotion to a family that ultimately discarded her revealed how house elves could be destroyed as completely by misguided protection as by deliberate cruelty. Crouch's insistence on keeping his son's crimes secret forced Winky to bear the psychological burden of concealing truths that violated every principle of justice she had been taught to value. Her alcoholism, after dismissal, was not mere weakness but a desperate attempt to numb the pain of conflicting loyalties that had been impossible to reconcile. The complex relationship between protection and oppression in the Crouch household illustrated how good intentions could produce devastating results when combined with fundamental disrespect for house elf agency and intelligence. Crouch believed he was shielding Winky from knowledge that would hurt her, but his protection required her to become complicit in actions that violated her deepest moral convictions, creating internal conflicts that ultimately destroyed her ability to function effectively in any environment. The regional differences in house elf treatment across magical Britain reflected broader cultural variations in attitudes toward power, hierarchy, and the proper relationship between magical beings of different species. Northern families, influenced by Scottish traditions that emphasized clan loyalty and mutual obligation, often developed more collaborative relationships with their house elves, treating them as valued retainers whose opinions carried weight in household decisions. These families understood that house elves whose talents were respected and whose contributions were acknowledged would provide better service than those who were merely terrorized into compliance. Their manor houses became showcases for what could be achieved when elvish magic was channeled through willing cooperation rather than fearful submission, with domestic enchantments that created environments of unprecedented comfort and beauty. Southern pure-blood families, particularly those with strong connections to continental European magical traditions, maintained stricter hierarchical distinctions that emphasized the distance between masters and servants, while still acknowledging the value of elvish contributions. Their house elves lived lives that were comfortable but carefully circumscribed, with clear boundaries that were never crossed but which allowed for dignity within accepted limitations. The most progressive families, often those whose fortunes were more recent and whose social status was less secure, experimented with approaches that bordered on employment rather than ownership, providing wages, regular time off, and even retirement benefits for house elves who served faithfully for extended periods. These innovations were viewed with suspicion by traditional pure-blood society, but often produced remarkable results in terms of elf satisfaction and household efficiency. Continental European approaches to house elf management varied significantly from British traditions, reflecting different cultural values and legal frameworks that had evolved over centuries of magical development. French magical families, influenced by their culture's emphasis on sophistication and refinement, often treated their house elves as artisans whose skills deserved recognition, even if their social status remained fixed. German magical houses, with their tradition of precision and systematic organization, developed elaborate protocols for house elf management that emphasized efficiency and predictability while providing clear paths for advancement within household hierarchies. Italian families, true to their cultural values, often integrated house elves more completely into family life, treating them almost as distant relatives whose contributions were essential to maintaining household harmony and prosperity. The role of house elves in maintaining pure-blood genealogies extended far beyond simple domestic service to encompass responsibilities that touched the very foundations of wizarding society's power structures. These elves served as living repositories of family history, witnesses to private moments that could make or break political alliances, keepers of secrets that could destroy reputations, or reveal crimes that official investigations had failed to uncover. Their enforced silence regarding family affairs was protected by magical oaths, so binding that violation was literally impossible, making them ideal confidants for activities that required absolute discretion. Pure-blood families engaged in everything from tax evasion to treason knew that their house elves could never testify against them, could never reveal incriminating evidence, could never break trust even under magical compulsion or threat of death. This enforced discretion made house elves essential partners in the elaborate deceptions that allowed pure-blood society to maintain facades of respectability while engaging in activities that would have scandalized the magical public. If revealed, they cleaned up evidence, disposed of inconvenient witnesses, and maintained alibis that protected their masters from consequences, while never being able to seek protection for themselves when their assistants made them accessories to crimes. The knowledge that house elves possessed about pure-blood family secrets created complex power dynamics within households, as masters who depended on their servants' discretion could never be entirely certain of their loyalty despite magical compulsions that made betrayal impossible. The most paranoid families developed elaborate systems for compartmentalizing information, ensuring that no single house elf knew enough to piece together the full scope of their master's activities. The economics of house elf labor in wizarding society represented one of the most significant advantages that magical families possessed over their Muggle counterparts, allowing them to maintain lifestyles that would have required dozens of paid servants, while employing only one or two elves whose magical abilities multiplied their effectiveness exponentially. A single house elf could accomplish tasks that would challenge entire staffs of human servants, working continuously without need for rest, wages, or benefits. This economic advantage was jealously guarded by established wizarding families, who understood that their ability to maintain grand estates and elaborate social lives depended entirely on access to house elf labor that cost them nothing beyond basic sustenance and minimal housing. The prospect of paying wages to house elves was viewed not just as unnecessary expense, but as fundamental threat to the economic foundations that supported pure-blood society. The marriage contracts that governed pure-blood alliances often included detailed provisions regarding house elf ownership and transfer, treating these magical beings as valuable assets whose disposition required careful negotiation. Families with particularly skilled or long-serving house elves used them as bargaining chips in matrimonial arrangements, while those with problematic or aging elves sought to transfer responsibility to their new relatives through carefully worded agreements. The transfer of house elf ownership through marriage created complex loyalties that could span multiple families and generations, as elves bound to serve one household found themselves responsible to in-laws whose values and expectations might differ dramatically from those of their original masters. These transitions required careful management to prevent conflicts that could disrupt family harmony or compromise the elves' effectiveness in their expanded roles. Young house elves born into pure-blood households began their education in service before they could walk properly, learning through observation and imitation the countless tasks that would define their entire existence. They absorbed not just practical skills but emotional attitudes, developing the psychological frameworks that would allow them to find satisfaction in servitude, while suppressing any desires for independence or self-determination. The most successful pure-blood families understood that early childhood education of their house elves was crucial for developing servants who would provide decades of reliable service without developing the psychological problems that could make them unreliable or dangerous. They invested considerable attention in shaping young elf personalities, encouraging traits that supported effective service, while discouraging independence, curiosity, or ambition that might lead to questioning of established relationships. The generational relationships between pure-blood families and house elf dynasties created bonds that transcended simple employment, developing into complex emotional connections that could span centuries and outlast multiple family lines. House elves who had served the same families for generations possessed intimate knowledge of personality patterns, behavioral tendencies, and psychological needs that allowed them to anticipate their master's requirements with supernatural accuracy. These long-term relationships often developed their own internal logic and emotional patterns that outsiders found difficult to understand, combining genuine affection with systematic oppression in ways that seemed contradictory, but which reflected the complex realities of lives spent in such intimate proximity. House elves who had watched their masters grow from children to adults to elderly patriarchs often developed protective instincts that went far beyond mere duty, while families who had depended on the same elvish lineages for centuries often felt genuine grief when death or dismissal ended relationships that had defined their domestic lives. The dark magic that permeated many pure-blood households affected their house elves in ways that were rarely acknowledged, but which shaped their personalities and abilities in fundamental ways. Prolonged exposure to cursed artifacts, dark rituals, and malevolent enchantments gradually corrupted elvish magic, making it more powerful, but also more dangerous, more effective, but also more unpredictable. House elves who served families involved in the darkest magical practices often developed abilities that exceeded normal elvish capabilities, gaining power over shadows, enhanced sensitivity to magical auras, and intuitive understanding of curse work that made them valuable assets in their master's illegal activities. But this enhanced power came at the cost of psychological stability and moral clarity, creating servants who were more effective but also more dangerous to everyone around them. The legacy of pure-blood house elf ownership would endure long after the families themselves faded from prominence, leaving behind generations of elves whose personalities had been shaped by centuries of systematic oppression or benevolent paternalism. These psychological patterns, embedded so deeply in elvish culture that they became indistinguishable from natural traits, would influence how future generations of house elves understood their place in magical society and their relationships with the wizarding families they served. The grand manor houses themselves, when finally abandoned or sold, retain the magical imprints of centuries of house elf labor, their stones warm with absorbed dedication, their rooms echoing with whispered conversations between servants whose loyalty had outlasted the masters they had served so faithfully. In these empty halls, the ghosts of house elf service lingered like perfume in abandoned rooms, testament to lives spent in shadows that had shaped the very foundations of wizarding civilization. The first pale light of dawn had barely touched the castle towers when the great kitchens of Hogwarts stirred to life, beginning another day in the endless cycle of preparation, service, and satisfaction that had defined house elf existence for nearly 1,000 years. In the warm depths beneath the great hall, where ancient stones retained the heat of countless cooking fires, and the air itself seemed seasoned with centuries of culinary magic, over 100 house elves moved through their morning rituals with the practiced precision of a perfectly choreographed dance. The day began in darkness, long before human inhabitants stirred in their comfortable beds, as the early shift of kitchen elves emerged from their cozy quarters to assess the requirements that the coming hours would bring. The head cook, an ancient elf whose wrinkled features bore the wisdom of 7 decades spent perfecting the art of magical cuisine, stood in the center of the great kitchen, like a general surveying a battlefield. her enormous ears twitching as she absorbed the subtle sounds that told her everything she needed to know about the castle's awakening rhythms. The breakfast preparation commenced with the lighting of the great hearths, their flames springing to life not from mundane kindling but from magical fires that burned at precisely controlled temperatures, never smoking, never fluctuating, never requiring fuel beyond the house elves' concentrated intention. The porridge cauldrons, each large enough to bathe a troll, began their slow warming as elves added oats that had been stored in chambers where time moved differently, keeping them forever fresh and perfectly textured. The bread ovens, carved from single blocks of volcanic stone and enhanced with warming charms that had been continuously maintained since Hufflepuff's time, received their first loaves of the day as master bakers worked with dough that had been rising through the night in conditions of perfect humidity and temperature. These elves possessed an almost mystical understanding of yeast and grain, their magic flowing through their fingertips to create breads that were more than mere sustenance, becoming vehicles for comfort and satisfaction that sustained both body and spirit. The hierarchy within the kitchen operated on principles that balanced expertise with cooperation, ensuring that the most skilled elves could guide operations while allowing every individual to contribute their unique talents to the collective effort. Senior elves who had earned their positions through decades of dedicated service worked alongside younger house elves whose enthusiasm and fresh perspectives brought innovation to traditional techniques, creating an environment where knowledge flowed freely in all directions. The sauce specialists began their day by checking the stocks that had been simmering through the night, their sensitive noses detecting the precise moment when bone and vegetable and herb had surrendered their essences to create broths of unparalleled richness and complexity. These elves worked with ingredients that came from every corner of the magical world. Dragon steaks that required specific handling to prevent their inherent magic from overwhelming more delicate flavors. Phoenix eggs that could only be used at the exact moment of their magical maturity. Unicorn milk that demanded preparation techniques known only to the most trusted kitchen staff. The morning's first great challenge was the simultaneous preparation of 4 distinct breakfast services, each tailored to the preferences and traditions of different Hogwarts houses, while maintaining the visual harmony and nutritional balance that the Great Hall's elaborate presentation required. Gryffindor breakfasts emphasized hearty, warming foods that would fuel active days filled with Quidditch practice and adventurous exploration, while Ravenclaw meals featured delicate, precisely prepared dishes that appealed to students who appreciated culinary artistry as much as academic excellence. Hufflepuff breakfasts reflected the house's values of comfort and inclusion, offering familiar foods prepared with extraordinary care alongside exotic options that introduced students to flavors from throughout the magical world. Slytherin meals emphasized sophistication and presentation, featuring ingredients and preparation methods that demonstrated the refinement and attention to detail that house members were expected to cultivate in all aspects of their lives. The magical transportation of food from kitchen to Great Hall required coordination that would have challenged the most experienced military commanders, as hundreds of dishes had to arrive simultaneously while maintaining perfect temperature and appearance. The house elves responsible for this operation worked in perfect synchronization, their magic flowing together to create transportation spells of unprecedented complexity and reliability. Plates appeared on tables with gentle precision, never disturbing existing place settings, never arriving too early or too late, never failing to match exactly the portions that individual students required. The cleanup that followed breakfast service demonstrated the efficiency that house elf magic could achieve when applied to mundane tasks, as hundreds of dishes, cups, and utensils returned to the kitchens instantly upon being emptied, arriving already sorted, and ready for washing in magical sinks that cleaned them more thoroughly than any human technique could manage. The great hall tables cleared themselves and reset for the next meal in movements so smooth and coordinated that they resembled choreographed performances more than simple housekeeping. Between meal services, the kitchen elves turned their attention to the countless other tasks that maintaining castle operations required, from preparing snacks for students working late in the library, to creating special dietary accommodations for professors with particular nutritional needs or magical conditions that affected their ability to digest normal foods. The hospital wing required a constant supply of invalid foods, broths, and jellies enhanced with healing properties, while the greenhouses needed elves who could prepare meals for the magical plants that required animal proteins or specific mineral supplements to thrive. The seasonal celebrations that marked the magical calendar required months of advanced preparation, as house elves worked to create presentations that would honor tradition while accommodating the practical constraints of feeding hundreds of people simultaneously. The Halloween feast began its preparation in late August, when elves started growing the enormous pumpkins that would serve as both decoration and ingredients, using greenhouse magic that accelerated growth while enhancing flavor and ensuring perfect consistency across dozens of individual plants. Christmas preparations commenced even earlier, as the most complex dishes required extended preparation periods, and some ingredients could only be obtained at specific times of year when their magical properties reached optimal levels. The Christmas puddings alone required 6 months of preparation, their ingredients added in precise sequences that followed recipes passed down through generations of kitchen elves, each addition timed to coincide with particular lunar phases or astrological alignments that enhanced the final product's magical and nutritional properties. The Valentine's Day celebrations presented unique challenges, as house elves worked to create foods that would enhance romantic feelings, while avoiding anything that might constitute actual love potions, which were forbidden within the castle grounds. The delicate balance between inspiration and manipulation required subtle understanding of human psychology and magical theory that few wizards could match, creating meals that encouraged warm feelings without crossing ethical boundaries. The relationships between house elves working in such close proximity developed along lines that reflected both their magical nature and their shared dedication to excellence in service. Friendships formed through collaborative work on particularly challenging dishes became bonds that could last for centuries, while romantic partnerships that developed within the kitchen community often produced elvish families whose combined talents reached levels of culinary artistry that individual achievement could never match. Young house elves born within the Hogwarts community grew up surrounded by the warmth and purpose that defined kitchen life, learning their earliest lessons through observation and imitation as they watched their parents and elders transform raw ingredients into magical sustenance. These elvish children developed skills and understanding that went far beyond simple cooking techniques, absorbing the philosophy of service and the pride in excellence that made their work more than mere labor. The elvish families that emerged within Hogwarts developed their own traditions and celebrations, marking personal milestones and community achievements with feasts that showcased their individual specialties, while honoring the collective effort that made their daily success possible. Weddings between kitchen elves became occasions for culinary innovation, as the couple and their friends competed to create dishes that demonstrated their skills while celebrating the union of talents that marriage represented. The passing down of cooking secrets through generations of kitchen elves created repositories of knowledge that existed nowhere else in the magical world, techniques and recipes that had been refined through centuries of practice and enhanced through the accumulated wisdom of dozens of master practitioners. These secrets were guarded carefully, but shared generously within the elvish community, ensuring that knowledge was preserved while continuing to evolve through practical application. The Great Hall feast logistics required planning and coordination that would have challenged the most experienced event organizers, as every aspect of presentation had to be considered and prepared for while maintaining the flexibility to accommodate last-minute changes or unexpected requirements. The house tables had to be set with appropriate ceremony, while ensuring that seating arrangements reflected current student relationships and any disciplinary considerations that might affect mealtime behavior. The magical enhancement of food presentation included spells that kept dishes at optimal serving temperatures throughout extended meals, enchantments that prevented spills or accidents that might disrupt the formal atmosphere, and protective charms that ensured food remained safe and wholesome despite being exposed to the magical emanations that filled the Great Hall during large gatherings. These spells required constant monitoring and adjustment as conditions changed throughout each meal service. The special dietary accommodations that house elves provided went far beyond simple preferences to encompass genuine medical needs and magical conditions that affected how different individuals processed nutrition. Students with lycanthropy required diets that helped them manage their transformations while maintaining their strength during the difficult days surrounding the full moon. Those with Vela heritage needed foods that supported their magical abilities without triggering the mood swings that could affect their control over their allure magic. The interaction between house elves and other magical castle inhabitants required diplomatic skills that were rarely recognized, but were essential for maintaining the harmonious environment that made Hogwarts feel like home to students who came from vastly different backgrounds. The kitchen elves served as informal mediators when conflicts arose between different communities within the castle. Their neutral status and genuine concern for everyone's welfare allowing them to broker compromises that more officially empowered figures might not have been able to achieve. The ghosts who haunted Hogwarts had developed relationships with generations of house elves, sharing memories of earlier eras while providing historical context that helped the living inhabitants understand how current practices had evolved from earlier traditions. Nearly headless Nick's friendship with several senior kitchen elves gave him insights into castle operations that he used to help students navigate academic challenges, while the Grey Lady's knowledge of hidden passages often proved useful when elves needed to transport supplies or complete maintenance tasks without disrupting classes. The portraits that lined castle walls served as informal communication network for house elves who needed to coordinate activities across different areas of the vast building, carrying messages and providing updates on changing conditions that might affect meal timing or special requirements. The portrait inhabitants had developed genuine affection for many of the elves, appreciating their dedication while offering encouragement during particularly challenging periods. The magical creatures that lived within the castle grounds often required specialized care that fell to house elves, whose knowledge of creature needs exceeded that of most care of magical creatures professors. The castle's population of mice, rats, and other small animals received regular feeding and veterinary care from elves who understood their role in maintaining the castle's ecological balance. Even Peeves the poltergeist, despite his chaotic nature, had developed grudging respect for certain house elves who had learned to work around his pranks while occasionally enlisting his help in tasks that required his unique abilities. The elvish living spaces beneath the castle had evolved over centuries into communities that balanced privacy with communal activity, providing each individual with personal territory while maintaining the social connections that were essential to elvish psychological health. The common hearth served not just as gathering place but as the emotional center of elvish life, where celebrations and sorrows were shared, where wisdom was passed between generations, where the bonds of friendship and family were nurtured and strengthened. Individual elvish quarters reflected personal interests and achievements, while maintaining the cozy, enclosed feeling that made elves feel secure and comfortable. Some elves decorated their spaces with collections of particularly beautiful kitchen tools, while others displayed samples of their finest culinary creations, preserved through stasis charms. Family quarters included special areas for elvish children, spaces designed to support their development while keeping them safe during their parents' working hours. The recreational activities that house elves enjoyed during their limited free time often centered around competitions and collaborative projects that extended their professional skills into personal satisfaction and artistic expression. Cooking contests between different kitchen specialties produced innovations that were eventually incorporated into regular meal services, while collaborative projects to create elaborate pastries or complex preserves became opportunities for creative expression that went beyond the practical requirements of their daily duties. The Elvish tradition of storytelling preserved not just their own cultural heritage but the history of Hogwarts itself, as generations of elves had witnessed events and personalities that official histories might overlook or misrepresent. These stories, told around the common hearth during quiet evening hours, created continuity between past and present, while providing younger elves with understanding of their place in the castle's long and complex history. The medical care that house elves provided for each other reflected their deep understanding of both magical and mundane healing techniques, combining traditional elvish remedies with knowledge gained through centuries of preparing invalid foods for sick students and staff. Their abilities in this area often exceeded those of professionally trained healers, particularly in treating conditions that affected magical creatures or resulted from prolonged exposure to domestic magic. The quiet pride that house elves took in their work was perhaps their most defining characteristic, reflecting not civility, but professional satisfaction in achieving excellence that few could match. They understood their role as essential partners in the educational mission that defined Hogwarts, creating the stable, nurturing environment that allowed students to focus on learning while feeling genuinely cared for and supported. Their magic, freely given and gratefully received, became part of the castle's fundamental character, contributing to the sense of home that made Hogwarts more than just a school, but a place where magic itself seemed to flow with warmth and welcome. The small house elf, who would become the most famous of his kind, was born into servitude so complete that his earliest memories were shaped not by play or wonder, but by the constant expectation of punishment that defined every moment of existence in Malfoy Manor. Dobby entered the world in the cold stone chambers beneath the grand estate, his first cries echoing through corridors that had witnessed centuries of elvish suffering, his birth celebrated by no one save his exhausted mother, who held him close while calculating how quickly she must return to her duties, lest her absence be noticed and punished. The Malfoy family's approach to house elf management had been refined through generations of pure-blood arrogance into a system of psychological torture so subtle and pervasive that their elves came to believe that cruelty was not just normal but deserved. Dobby's education in fear began before he could walk properly, as he learned through observation and painful experience that his existence served no purpose beyond making his masters' lives more convenient and comfortable, that his own needs and desires were not merely secondary but completely irrelevant to the household's functioning. Young Dobby's magical abilities manifested early and powerfully, far exceeding what most house elves displayed even in maturity, but this natural talent only made his position more precarious, rather than improving his treatment. Lucius Malfoy recognized the extraordinary potential in his family's newest servant and understood that such power, if not properly controlled and channeled, could pose a genuine threat to the established order that kept his household running exactly as he preferred. The psychological conditioning that shaped Dobby's early years was masterful in its systematic thoroughness, designed to ensure that his considerable magical abilities would never be turned against his masters, no matter how cruelly they treated him. Every display of independent thought was met with punishment that escalated until submission was complete. Every expression of personal desire was crushed so thoroughly that Dobby learned to suppress his own wishes before they could even form into conscious thoughts. The self-punishment rituals that became Dobby's signature behavior were not natural expressions of house elf psychology, but learned responses that had been systematically encouraged and reinforced by masters who understood that an elf who punished himself was more controllable than one who required constant external discipline. The iron that burned his hands, the walls that bruised his body, the constant repetition of degrading phrases, all were tools in an elaborate psychological campaign designed to break his spirit while preserving his usefulness. Yet beneath the layers of conditioning and fear, something essentially pure and hopeful survived in Dobby's nature, a spark of defiance that no amount of cruelty could completely extinguish. This inner light, invisible to his masters but burning steadily through years of abuse, would eventually become the foundation for his transformation from cowering servant to courageous hero, though the journey between those states would test every limit of his endurance and courage. The arrival of Harry Potter in Dobby's life represented more than simple hope for rescue, but a fundamental challenge to every assumption that had shaped his understanding of his place in the magical world. Here was a wizard who spoke to him as if his opinions mattered, who looked genuinely distressed by evidence of his mistreatment, who seemed to believe that house elves deserved better treatment than they typically received. These revolutionary concepts threatened to undermine the entire psychological framework that had kept Dobby functional within the Malfoy household for decades. The internal conflict that Harry's kindness created within Dobby was agonizing in its intensity, pitting years of conditioning against newfound hope in ways that made normal functioning nearly impossible. Every instinct trained into him demanded absolute loyalty to his masters, while his growing understanding of Harry's character suggested that such loyalty might be misplaced, that there might be alternatives to the life of servitude and fear that had defined his entire existence. The gradual awakening of Dobby's moral consciousness was perhaps the most remarkable transformation in the entire history of house elf liberation, demonstrating that even the most thoroughly conditioned servant could rediscover their capacity for independent moral judgment when exposed to examples of genuine kindness and respect. His growing ability to distinguish between legitimate authority and mere bullying, between service freely given and slavery imposed through force, marked stages in a psychological development that his masters had believed they had permanently prevented. The crisis that led to Dobby's liberation came when his conflicting loyalties finally became impossible to reconcile, forcing him to choose between obedience to masters who valued him only for his usefulness and protection of a young wizard who had shown him the first genuine kindness he had ever experienced. The courage required to make this choice cannot be overstated, as Dobby was essentially choosing to abandon everything familiar and secure in his life for an uncertain future that might prove even more dangerous than his current circumstances. Harry Potter's clever manipulation of Lucius Malfoy into providing the sock that would free Dobby demonstrated not just tactical intelligence, but deep understanding of the magical laws that governed house elf bondage. The moment when that simple piece of clothing touched Dobby's hands was perhaps the most significant liberation in magical history, representing not just one elf's freedom, but proof that the system of house elf servitude contained the seeds of its own destruction for those brave enough to exploit them. The explosion of power that erupted from Dobby when he defended Harry against Lucius Malfoy's rage revealed the true extent of magical ability that bondage had kept suppressed, showing that house elves were not naturally weak beings who required wizarding protection, but powerful creatures whose abilities had been artificially constrained through magical and psychological manipulation. Free elves, it became clear, were forces of nature that even the most arrogant pure-blood wizards ignored at their peril. The adjustment to freedom proved more challenging than Dobby had anticipated, as years of conditioning could not be overcome simply through liberation from his legal bonds to the Malfoy family. His understanding of how to function in the world beyond domestic service was limited. His social skills were underdeveloped, and his emotional responses had been shaped by experiences that made normal relationships difficult to establish and maintain. The period of wandering that followed Dobby's liberation was essential for his psychological development, allowing him to discover his own preferences and capabilities without the constant pressure of masters' demands or expectations. He learned that freedom meant not just the absence of orders but the presence of choices. That independence required not just courage but practical skills that his sheltered life had never allowed him to develop. The various employment opportunities that Dobby explored during his early freedom revealed both the prejudices that limited options for house elves in wizarding society and his own struggles to adapt to relationships that were not based on absolute submission to authority. Many potential employers expected civility that Dobby was no longer willing to provide, while others were uncomfortable with the idea of treating a house elf as anything approaching an equal partner in working relationships. The recognition that freedom without purpose could be as emotionally damaging as slavery with meaning led Dobby to understand that true liberation required not just escape from oppression, but discovery of meaningful ways to use his abilities in service of causes and people he genuinely valued. His eventual decision to seek employment at Hogwarts represented not retreat into familiar servitude but conscious choice to serve an institution whose values aligned with his newfound moral compass. Albus Dumbledore's willingness to employ a free house elf on terms that respected his autonomy while utilizing his extraordinary abilities represented a revolutionary approach to human-elf relationships that challenged centuries of assumption about how such partnerships should function. The negotiations that established Dobby's employment demonstrated that elves could indeed function as employees rather than property when their dignity was respected and their contributions were properly valued. The wages that Dobby received for his work at Hogwarts were significant, not for their monetary value but for what they represented. Acknowledgement that his labor had worth that deserved compensation. Recognition that he was a being capable of independent decision-making about how to use his time and abilities. The pride he took in earning money through honest work reflected his understanding that true dignity came through voluntary service rather than compelled obedience. Dobby's relationship with the other Hogwarts house elves revealed the complex dynamics that freedom introduced into traditional Elvish communities, as his presence challenged assumptions about the naturalness of servitude while creating tensions between those who embraced liberation and those who found comfort in familiar patterns of submission. His attempts to encourage other elves to demand better treatment often met with resistance that reflected not just fear of change, but genuine philosophical differences about the nature of happiness and fulfillment. The influence that Dobby's example had on broader discussions about house elf rights extended far beyond Hogwarts, inspiring activists like Hermione Granger, while simultaneously provoking backlash from wizarding traditionalists who viewed his liberation as dangerous precedent that threatened the economic and social structures upon which their society was built. His very existence became a political statement that forced magical society to confront uncomfortable questions about the ethics of a system that had been accepted without question for centuries. The friendships that Dobby developed with students and staff at Hogwarts demonstrated his capacity for relationships based on mutual respect and affection rather than fear and obligation, revealing aspects of his personality that servitude had never allowed to develop fully. His loyalty to Harry Potter remained absolute, but it was now loyalty freely given rather than magically compelled, making it more meaningful and more genuine than any bond that could be imposed through legal or magical constraint. The domestic magic that Dobby performed in his role as paid employee of Hogwarts reached new levels of sophistication and artistry, as freedom allowed him to apply his considerable abilities without the psychological constraints that had limited his effectiveness while serving the Malfoys. His work became expression of creativity and pride, rather than mere fulfillment of orders, producing results that amazed even experienced observers of house elf capabilities. The courage that Dobby displayed in dangerous situations grew from his understanding that freedom meant not just the right to make choices, but the responsibility to make good choices, that independence required him to act according to his own moral judgment, rather than simply following orders from others. His willingness to risk his safety for causes he believed in demonstrated that liberation had awakened not just his desire for better treatment, but his capacity for genuine heroism. The final sacrifice that ended Dobby's life represented the ultimate expression of freedom's meaning, as he chose to die protecting people he loved, rather than live under the threat of returning to the bondage and degradation that had defined his early existence. His death was not tragic waste, but triumphant affirmation that some things were worth dying for, that dignity and friendship and justice were more valuable than mere survival under any conditions. The impact of Dobby's sacrifice on those who witnessed it extended far beyond immediate grief, to encompass profound recognition of what had been lost and what had been gained through his transformation from slave to hero. Harry Potter's tears over Dobby's grave were not just mourning for a friend, but acknowledgement of the terrible price that freedom sometimes demanded from those brave enough to claim it fully. The legacy of Dobby's life and death influenced the broader movement for house elf liberation in ways that no amount of political activism could have achieved, providing concrete proof that elves were capable of nobility, courage, and self-sacrifice that equaled anything displayed by the wizards who had claimed superiority over them for centuries. His example became inspiration for other elves, while serving as challenge to wizarding society's assumptions about the natural order of relationships between magical species. The memorial that Harry created for Dobby, simple though it was, became symbol of recognition that had been denied to countless house elves who had lived and died in service to wizarding families without ever receiving acknowledgement of their sacrifice or appreciation of their contributions. The words carved on his grave marker represented not just tribute to one exceptional elf, but recognition of the dignity that all house elves deserved, but few had ever received. The transformation of Dobby from cowering servant to heroic martyr demonstrated that the potential for greatness existed within every house elf, waiting only for the right circumstances and sufficient courage to manifest itself fully. His life proved that freedom was not gift to be granted by benevolent masters, but right to be claimed by those brave enough to demand it and wise enough to use it well. The revolution that Dobby's example inspired was quiet but profound, changing how progressive elements of wizarding society viewed their relationships with magical creatures, while providing template for liberation that other oppressed beings could adapt to their own circumstances. His path from slavery to freedom to heroic sacrifice became legendary, not just among house elves, but among all those who understood that true change required not just good intentions, but genuine courage from those willing to risk everything for principles larger than personal safety. In the gloomiest corner of number 12 Grimmauld Place, where shadows seemed to pool like stagnant water, and the very air tasted of centuries of accumulated bitterness, lived an ancient house elf whose heart had been twisted by decades of faithful service to masters who had repaid his devotion with contempt, cruelty, and casual disregard for everything that made life worth living. Kreacher had served the noble and most ancient House of Black for over 70 years. His small frame bent not just by age, but by the weight of secrets too dark to share, loyalties too complex to untangle, and grief too deep to heal through any balm that his tormented existence could provide. The early years of Kreacher's service had been shaped by the Black family's golden age, when their pure-blood supremacist ideology still commanded respect throughout wizarding society, and their wealth could purchase any luxury or convenience their hearts desired. Young Kreacher had learned his duties in an atmosphere of grandeur and certainty, where family traditions were sacred, bloodline purity was paramount, and house elves knew their place in a hierarchy that seemed as natural and permanent as the stars in their courses. His education in the dark arts that defined Black family culture began subtly, as he was taught to clean and maintain magical objects whose true purposes were carefully concealed behind euphemism and tradition. The cursed artifacts that filled the house were presented as family heirlooms with interesting histories rather than tools of torture and murder, their malevolent auras explained as evidence of powerful magic, rather than the accumulated suffering they had caused over centuries of use. Kreacher's magical abilities, considerable even by house elf standards, were shaped and channeled through exposure to these dark objects, gradually altering his natural elvish magic until it carried undertones of shadow and malice that reflected the environment in which he had spent his formative years. This corruption was not dramatic transformation but slow poisoning, like water that becomes undrinkable through the gradual accumulation of toxins too dilute to notice until the damage is irreversible. The psychological conditioning that made Kreacher so perfectly suited to serve the Black family was reinforced through constant exposure to their ideological framework, which taught him that pure-blood wizards were inherently superior to all other magical beings and that house elves existed solely to facilitate their masters' comfort and convenience. This worldview became so deeply embedded in his understanding that questioning it would have required rejecting everything that gave his life structure and meaning. The decline of Black family fortunes during Kreacher's middle years created additional layers of bitterness and resentment that further poisoned his already damaged psyche, as he watched the grandeur he had helped maintain crumble through his master's poor decisions and changing social circumstances. The house that had once been a showcase of pure-blood elegance became a monument to faded glory, its treasures sold to pay debts, its rooms closed to save on heating costs, its reputation tarnished by association with increasingly desperate political causes. Mistress Walburga Black, whose portrait would continue to torment house guests long after her death, became the primary focus of Kreacher's devotion during these difficult years, her rage and disappointment at her family's decline matching his own grief at witnessing the destruction of everything he had spent his life serving. Her approval became the sole source of validation in his increasingly empty existence, her commands the only purpose that gave shape to days that might otherwise have been consumed by despair. The relationship between Kreacher and young Regulus Black represented the closest thing to genuine affection that the ancient house elf had ever experienced, though even this bond was complicated by the power dynamics and ideological constraints that shaped every aspect of life in Grimmauld Place. Regulus, unlike his rebellious older brother, embraced the family values that Kreacher had been taught to revere, making him the natural heir to traditions that gave the elf service meaning and dignity. When Regulus volunteered to accompany Voldemort on the mission to hide a Horcrux in the seaside cave, Kreacher's pride in his young master's importance to the Dark Lord's plans was mixed with instinctive fear that reflected his deep understanding of his master's tendency towards self-destruction. The mission represented everything the Black family claimed to stand for: service to pure-blood ideology, proximity to ultimate power, participation in magic so advanced that lesser wizards could never comprehend its significance. The horror that unfolded in that cursed cave, where Regulus was forced to drink potion that drove him to madness and despair before dragging him beneath waters that offered no hope of rescue, became the defining trauma of Kreacher's existence, shattering his faith in the natural order while leaving him bound by magical oaths that prevented him from seeking justice or even acknowledgement for his beloved master's sacrifice. The burden of keeping Regulus's true fate secret while watching his family mourn his disappearance as cowardly abandonment rather than heroic sacrifice created psychological conflicts that no house elf psychology was designed to handle, forcing Kreacher to carry truths that contradicted everything he had been taught about honor, loyalty, and the proper relationship between masters and servants. The years of isolation that followed, as Grimmauld Place emptied of living family members and filled instead with dust, decay, and the accumulated detritus of a bloodline that had consumed itself through hatred and extremism, transformed Kreacher from devoted servant into bitter guardian of memories that no one else valued or understood. His conversations with the portraits that lined the walls became his only social contact, creating an echo chamber where his resentments could fester without challenge or perspective. The arrival of the Order of the Phoenix in his beloved house represented the ultimate violation of everything Kreacher had spent his life protecting, as blood traitors and muggle lovers contaminated spaces that had been consecrated through centuries of pure blood occupation. The casual disrespect they showed for black family traditions and artifacts was, in his perception, deliberate desecration of sacred objects that embodied the ideals he had dedicated his existence to serving. Sirius Black's treatment of Kreacher revealed the complex psychology of a master who had rejected his family's values, while retaining their fundamental disrespect for house elf dignity and autonomy, viewing his family's ancient servant as symbol of everything he despised about his upbringing, rather than recognizing him as individual being whose loyalty deserved appreciation rather than contempt. The mutual hatred that developed between Sirius and Kreacher was toxic in ways that neither fully understood, as each embodied what the other most feared becoming, creating a cycle of cruelty and resentment that made rational communication impossible and gradually poisoned the atmosphere of the house, until even well-intentioned visitors could feel the malevolence that saturated every interaction. Kreacher's betrayal of Sirius to Narcissa Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange was not simple revenge, but desperate attempt to restore meaning to his existence by serving masters who still valued the traditions that had given his life purpose, even though his actions would ultimately destroy the last connection he had to the family he had served so faithfully for so long. The psychological aftermath of Sirius's death at the Department of Mysteries created new layers of guilt and confusion in Kreacher's already damaged mind, as he struggled to reconcile his role in engineering his master's destruction with his fundamental need to believe that his actions served worthy purposes and reflected proper house elf values. The transformation that began when Harry Potter finally showed Kreacher the respect and kindness that he had been denied throughout his long service to the Black family was perhaps the most remarkable rehabilitation in magical history, demonstrating that even the most bitter and damaged individuals could rediscover their capacity for positive action when treated with genuine humanity and understanding. Harry's decision to acknowledge Kreacher's grief over Regulus's death and to validate his loyalty to a master who had indeed died heroically rather than fleeing in cowardice addressed psychological wounds that had festered for over 15 years, providing the recognition and respect that Kreacher's dedication had always deserved but never received from other family members. The simple act of treating Kreacher as trustworthy partner rather than reluctant servant unlocked reserves of knowledge and capability that years of mistreatment had kept hidden, revealing that his apparent incompetence and hostility had been responses to disrespect rather than natural characteristics that made him unsuitable for important responsibilities. The quest to recover Slytherin's locket from the cave where Regulus had died allowed Kreacher to finally honor his beloved master's memory through meaningful action, transforming his survivor's guilt into purposeful dedication to completing the mission that had cost Regulus his life, but which remained essential to defeating the Dark Lord who had caused so much suffering. Kreacher's knowledge of the locket's location and the protections surrounding it proved invaluable to the larger war effort, demonstrating that house elves who were trusted with important information could become crucial allies rather than potential security risks, provided they were treated with the respect that their intelligence and dedication deserved. The meticulous planning and flawless execution that Kreacher displayed during the locket recovery mission revealed tactical abilities and magical skills that had been completely suppressed by decades of psychological abuse, showing that his apparent limitations had been imposed rather than natural, created through mistreatment rather than inherent in his character. The emotional healing that began during this collaboration with Harry, Ron, and Hermione extended beyond simple gratitude for better treatment to encompass genuine rediscovery of his own worth and capability, allowing him to remember what it felt like to take pride in accomplishments rather than simply avoiding punishment for failures. The physical transformation that accompanied Kreacher's psychological recovery was remarkable in its completeness, as improved nutrition, regular cleaning, and genuine appreciation for his efforts restored both his health and his dignity in ways that made his previous degraded appearance seem like costume rather than natural condition. His enthusiastic participation in the Battle of Hogwarts, leading the charge of house elves who chose to defend the castle that had provided them with meaningful work and respectful treatment, represented the culmination of his journey from bitter isolation to renewed purpose and community connection. The battle cry that Kreacher raised in honor of Regulus's memory demonstrated that his love for his fallen master had been purified of the toxic elements that had made it destructive, becoming instead inspiration for heroic action that honored both the living and the dead through service to causes larger than personal grievance. The post-war years that Kreacher spent as caretaker of Grimmauld Place, maintaining the house not as shrine to pure blood supremacy, but as memorial to the complexity of family loyalty and the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances, showed that it was possible to honor the past without being trapped by its mistakes. His patient work to restore the house's beauty, while removing its most toxic elements, created a living symbol of how traditions could be preserved and transformed simultaneously, keeping what was worthy while discarding what was harmful, maintaining connection to history, while refusing to repeat its worst errors. The relationships that Kreacher developed with visitors to the restored house reflected his hard-won understanding that respect and loyalty could exist between beings of different species and social positions, that service freely given was more meaningful than obedience compelled through fear or magical constraint. His stories about the Black family's history, told with the perspective that came from having witnessed both their greatness and their failures, became valuable lessons for younger generations about the dangers of ideological extremism and the importance of treating all beings with dignity regardless of their position in social hierarchies. The wisdom that Kreacher gained through his journey from devoted servitude through bitter betrayal to eventual redemption made him uniquely qualified to counsel other house elves who struggled with similar conflicts between loyalty to unworthy masters and moral responsibility to oppose injustice and cruelty. His example proved that transformation was possible even for those whose damage seemed irreversible, that kindness and respect could heal wounds that punishment and neglect had only deepened, that it was never too late to choose better paths forward, regardless of how dark the past might have been. The legacy of Kreacher's redemption extended far beyond his individual story to encompass broader lessons about the power of compassion to overcome prejudice, the importance of acknowledging the dignity of all beings regardless of their social status, and the possibility of finding meaning and purpose even in the aftermath of profound betrayal and loss. His peaceful final years, spent in service that was freely chosen rather than magically compelled, demonstrated that true loyalty grew from respect rather than fear, that genuine devotion flourished when it was appreciated rather than taken for granted, and that even the most bitter hearts could learn to love again when they were shown what love actually meant. The magical arts practiced by house elves represent perhaps the purest form of enchantment known to the wizarding world. Unencumbered by the theoretical constraints and artificial limitations that define human spellcasting, flowing instead through channels carved by millennia of evolution, necessity, and an intuitive understanding of magical forces that transcends academic knowledge. Where wizards learn magic through study and practice, elves embody it through their very existence, their abilities emerging not from memorized incantations or carefully waved wands, but from the deep wells of power that connect them directly to the fundamental forces that govern all magical reality. The apparition abilities that house elves display so casually represent achievements that would challenge even the most accomplished human wizards, yet elves perform these feats without conscious effort or apparent strain, disappearing and reappearing across vast distances while carrying loads that should make such transportation impossible according to established magical law. Their movement through space bypasses the violent crack and displacement of air that characterizes wizarding apparition, instead resembling the gentle fading of mist before morning sun, as if they simply cease to exist in one location and choose to exist in another. This extraordinary transportation ability operates on principles that magical theorists have studied for centuries without fully comprehending, suggesting that house elf magic draws upon spatial relationships that exist outside normal three-dimensional understanding. They can appear instantly in response to their master's calls, regardless of distance or intervening barriers, can transport themselves through wards that would block conventional magical travel, and can carry passengers or cargo without the splinching risks that make wizarding apparitions so dangerous for the unprepared. The domestic magic that forms the core of house elf abilities elevates mundane household tasks to the level of high art, transforming cooking, cleaning, and maintenance from simple labor into expressions of creative power that achieve results impossible through conventional means. When house elves prepare meals, they are not merely combining ingredients but weaving together flavors, textures, and nutritional properties in ways that nourish both body and spirit, creating sustenance that can heal emotional wounds as effectively as physical injuries. Their cooking enchantments operate through understanding of ingredients that goes beyond chemical composition to encompass the life histories, emotional associations, and magical properties that each component brings to the final dish. House elves can taste the happiness of grain that grew in fertile soil blessed by morning sun, can detect the melancholy of vegetables harvested during storms, can adjust their preparations to enhance positive qualities while neutralizing negative influences that might affect both flavor and the psychological impact of meals they prepare. The cleaning spells that house elves employ transcend simple removal of dirt and disorder to encompass restoration of spaces to their ideal states, removing not just physical contamination but psychic residues that accumulate wherever strong emotions have been experienced. Their magic can lift stains that have existed for decades, repair damage that seems irreversible, and create environments that feel cleansed not just of mess, but of the negative energy that accumulates in places where conflict, sadness, or fear have been concentrated. This restorative cleaning operates through magical principles that recognize the difference between mere tidiness and genuine renewal, addressing not just the visible signs of wear and neglect, but the underlying conditions that created problems in the first place. House elves can identify the sources of persistent odors, eliminate the causes of recurring damage, and create protective barriers that prevent future deterioration, while maintaining the natural aging processes that give lived-in spaces their character and warmth. The protective magic that house elves can manifest when their charges are threatened represents some of the most powerful defensive enchantments recorded in magical history. Yet these abilities remain dormant unless activated by genuine love, loyalty, or moral necessity. When house elves defend those they care about, their magic operates with intensity and precision that can overwhelm even expertly cast curses, creating shields that adapt instantly to whatever threats they encounter, while maintaining perfect discrimination between hostile and harmless forces. These protective enchantments draw power not from technique or training, but from the emotional bonds that connect elves to those they serve, becoming more effective as relationships deepen and more sophisticated as understanding grows between protector and protected. The magic recognizes intent rather than action, responding to hostile thoughts before they can manifest as harmful spells, creating defensive barriers that anticipate attacks rather than merely reacting to them after they have been launched. The limits that govern house elf magic are fascinating in their specificity and apparent arbitrariness, suggesting that their abilities operate within frameworks that were established through ancient agreements or fundamental magical laws, rather than natural evolutionary development. They cannot use their magic to directly harm their masters regardless of provocation, cannot transport themselves beyond certain geographic boundaries without permission, and cannot perform certain types of magic that would allow them to completely escape the bonds of service that define their existence. Yet within these constraints, house elf magic displays creativity and adaptability that often allows them to achieve objectives that technical limitations should make impossible, finding indirect approaches and innovative applications that accomplish their goals while remaining within the letter, if not the spirit, of their restrictions. They can defend their masters by attacking their masters' enemies, can transport themselves anywhere their duties require them to go, can use their abilities to influence situations in ways that serve their purposes while never technically violating the rules that govern their behavior. The wandless nature of house elf magic represents perhaps their most significant advantage over wizarding, spellcasting, eliminating the vulnerabilities that disarmament or equipment failure create for human magic users, while allowing for subtlety and concealment that wanded magic cannot match. Their spells leave different magical signatures than wizarding enchantments, making them difficult to trace or counter through conventional methods, while their emotional foundations make them remarkably resistant to the logical approaches that traditional magical defense employs. This wandless casting operates through direct manipulation of magical forces rather than channeling them through focus objects, allowing for precision and control that wands actually limit rather than enhance. House elves can shape their magic with the same dexterity that their hands display in physical tasks, creating complex, multi-layered enchantments that would require multiple wizards working in coordination to duplicate, while maintaining perfect stability in spells that might collapse under the accumulated strain of their own complexity. The theoretical discussions among magical scholars about the true extent of house elf power have continued for centuries without reaching definitive conclusions, as the self-imposed limitations and cultural constraints that govern elf behavior make it impossible to observe their abilities at full strength under controlled conditions. Some theorists argue that house elves, if freed from all restrictions and conditioning, might possess magical abilities that rival or exceed those of the most powerful wizards, while others maintain that their power is specifically adapted for domestic applications and would prove ineffective in other contexts. The evidence suggests that house elf magic operates on fundamentally different principles than wizarding spellcraft, drawing power from sources that academic magical theory has never fully identified or understood. Their abilities seem to strengthen through use rather than depleting magical reserves, to improve through emotional investment rather than deteriorating under pressure, and to adapt automatically to new challenges rather than requiring conscious modification of technique or approach. The suppression of house elf abilities through binding magic represents one of the most sophisticated applications of magical control ever developed, creating constraints that operate at such fundamental levels that they become indistinguishable from natural limitations. The spells that bind elves to families work by redirecting their magical flows through channels of service and loyalty, making their power dependent on their master's approval, while preventing them from accessing abilities that might threaten the established relationship dynamic. This suppression is not complete elimination of power, but careful channeling and limitation, allowing elves to retain the abilities that make them useful servants, while preventing access to magic that could make them independent or dangerous. The binding spells recognize the difference between permitted and forbidden applications of power, allowing defensive magic when it protects masters, while blocking the same abilities when they might be used for personal protection or advancement. The magical innovations that house elves have developed through centuries of creative problem-solving within their constraints demonstrate intellectual capabilities that conventional wisdom about their intelligence severely underestimates, revealing sophisticated understanding of magical theory that rivals anything produced by formally trained wizarding scholars. Their improvements to traditional enchantments, their development of new applications for familiar spells, and their creation of entirely original magical techniques suggest cognitive abilities that their submissive behavior deliberately conceals. These innovations are rarely recognized or credited to their creators, as house elf contributions to magical advancement are typically attributed to the wizarding families they serve or dismissed as instinctive behavior rather than conscious invention. The techniques that elves develop for improving household efficiency, enhancing magical security, or solving practical problems are absorbed into general magical knowledge without acknowledgement of their origins, creating a systematic appropriation of intellectual property that parallels the exploitation of elf labor. The emotional foundations of house elf magic create both tremendous strengths and significant vulnerabilities in their spellcasting abilities, as their power flows most freely when they are serving purposes they genuinely believe in, but becomes unreliable or even counterproductive when they are forced to act against their moral convictions or emotional attachments. This dependence on positive emotional states makes them more effective servants when they are treated well, but also creates opportunities for psychological manipulation that unscrupulous masters can exploit. The magic itself seems to respond to the elf's psychological state, becoming more powerful and sophisticated when the caster feels valued and appreciated, while growing weak and unpredictable when the elf experiences depression, resentment, or moral conflict. This emotional dependency explains why house elves who are treated with cruelty often develop magical problems that affect their effectiveness, while those who receive kindness and respect can achieve remarkable feats that exceed anything in their previous experience. The collaborative magic that emerges when multiple house elves work together represents some of the most impressive group spellcasting ever observed, creating effects that scale exponentially rather than additively with the number of participants. The kitchen operations at Hogwarts demonstrate this phenomenon daily, as over 100 house elves coordinate their individual abilities to create magical effects that would challenge entire departments of trained ministry wizards to duplicate. This collaborative casting operates without the complex ritual frameworks and careful timing that wizarding group magic requires, instead emerging naturally from shared purpose and mutual respect among the participating elves. Their magic flows together like streams joining a river, each individual contribution enhancing and being enhanced by the others, until the collective result transcends anything that the sum of individual abilities could produce. The healing applications of house elf magic, while rarely recognized or studied by magical medical professionals, represent sophisticated understanding of both physical and psychological restoration that goes far beyond simple first aid or comfort measures. House elves can detect illness and injury through magical sensitivity that allows them to identify problems before symptoms become apparent, while their treatments address underlying causes rather than merely alleviating surface manifestations. Their healing techniques combine practical knowledge gained through centuries of caring for their masters with intuitive understanding of how magical and mundane remedies can be integrated to enhance each other's effectiveness. The foods they prepare for invalid care carry therapeutic properties that support recovery, while their cleaning and maintenance of sick rooms creates environments that promote healing through subtle magical influences that medical texts have never documented or analyzed. The defensive applications of house elf magic, when fully unleashed in protection of those they love, can create barriers and countermeasures that challenge the most sophisticated attack spells ever developed. Yet these same abilities remain completely dormant unless activated by genuine threats to their charges. The protective instincts that drive such responses operate at levels deeper than conscious thought, triggering magical defenses that elves themselves might not realize they possess until circumstances demand their activation. The speed and precision with which house elves can deploy defensive magic exceeds anything that trained auras can achieve, as their responses emerge from instinct rather than conscious decision-making processes that create delay between recognition of threats and implementation of countermeasures. Their shields adapt instantly to whatever attacks they encounter, while their offensive responses are calibrated to neutralize threats without causing unnecessary harm to attackers who might be acting under compulsion or magical influence. The transformation magic that allows house elves to alter their appearance, size, and even physical capabilities in response to specific needs demonstrates shape-changing abilities that rival those of metamorph magi, while being available to every member of their species, rather than being limited to rare genetic variants. These transformations are typically subtle and temporary, allowing elves to reach high places, fit through small spaces, or modify their strength and endurance to meet the demands of particular tasks. The applications of this transformation ability extend beyond simple physical modification to encompass changes in magical signature and presence that can make house elves effectively invisible to detection spells that would easily locate human magic users. Their ability to suppress their magical emanations while maintaining their casting abilities makes them ideal for covert operations, while their capacity to enhance specific physical attributes allows them to perform tasks that should require multiple individuals or specialized equipment. The temporal magic that some house elves display in managing complex household schedules and coordinating multiple simultaneous tasks suggests understanding of time manipulation that formal magical education considers to be among the most advanced and dangerous branches of spell work. Their ability to accomplish tasks that should require more time than is available, to be present in multiple locations simultaneously, and to coordinate activities with precision that defies normal temporal limitations, indicates mastery of chronological magic that few wizards ever achieve. These temporal applications are subtle and localized, affecting only the immediate environment and never creating the paradoxes or catastrophic failures that make time magic so feared by magical authorities. House elves seem to instinctively understand the limitations that must govern temporal manipulation, working within constraints that prevent dangerous consequences while achieving practical results that dramatically enhance their effectiveness as household managers and domestic servants. The legacy of house elf magical innovation continues to influence wizarding society in ways that are rarely acknowledged or appreciated, as techniques developed by elf ingenuity become incorporated into general magical practice without recognition of their origins. The enhanced preservation charms used in modern magical households, the improved transportation spells that make wizarding travel safer and more efficient, and the sophisticated protective wards that guard important magical institutions all show evidence of house elf contributions that official magical history systematically ignores or misattributes to wizarding inventors. The spark of moral awakening that would eventually transform Hermione Granger from brilliant student into passionate advocate for magical creature rights ignited during the Quidditch World Cup of 1994, when she witnessed the terror and helplessness of Winky the house elf as Death Eaters rampaged through the campground, turning what should have been a celebration of magical sport into a nightmare of prejudice and violence made manifest. The sight of a trembling house elf forced to occupy the top box despite her obvious distress, magically compelled to witness events that violated every instinct for safety and self-preservation, revealed to Hermione's keen intellect the systematic cruelty that underpinned Wizarding Society's treatment of magical beings they considered inferior. The revelation that house elves were not just servants but slaves, bound by magical compulsions that made resistance impossible and escape unthinkable, shattered comfortable assumptions that Hermione had unconsciously absorbed about the natural order of Wizarding Society. Her Muggle upbringing, which had taught her that all intelligent beings possessed inherent dignity regardless of their circumstances, provided a moral framework that made the casual acceptance of Elvish servitude not just wrong, but actively evil, in ways that required immediate action rather than gradual reform. The formation of the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare represented Hermione's first attempt to translate moral outrage into practical activism, though her initial approaches revealed both the depth of her compassion and the limitations of her understanding about the complex realities that shaped house elf psychology and social relationships. Her assumption that all elves would naturally desire freedom if given the choice reflected her own cultural values rather than careful study of Elvish perspectives and preferences, creating well-intentioned initiatives that often caused more distress than relief for their intended beneficiaries. The acronym S.P.E.W, which she eventually accepted despite its unfortunate connotations, became emblematic of the challenges that faced anyone attempting to advocate for beings whose voices had been systematically suppressed for centuries. Her original name for the organization, the impossibly lengthy "Stop the Outrageous Abuse of Our Fellow Magical Creatures" and Campaign for a Change in Their Legal Status, reflected her academic tendency to approach problems through comprehensive analysis and systematic classification rather than the emotional appeals that might have proven more effective with her target audience. The badges and leaflets that Hermione produced with characteristic thoroughness demonstrated her faith in education as a tool for social change, her belief that rational argument and factual evidence could overcome centuries of prejudice and self-interest if presented clearly and persistently enough. Her materials cited legal precedents, historical examples, and moral principles with the precision of a trained barrister. Yet they failed to acknowledge the emotional and psychological barriers that made most wizards unwilling to examine their relationship with house elves too closely. Her fellow students' reactions to S.P.E.W ranged from polite indifference to active hostility, reflecting broader wizarding society's discomfort with challenges to social structures that provided them with significant advantages, while requiring no conscious cruelty on their part. Many students had grown up with house elf service without ever questioning its ethics, viewing their families' elves as happy servants rather than oppressed slaves, making Hermione's activism seem like interference with relationships they considered mutually beneficial. Ron Weasley's initial resistance to S.P.E.W was particularly painful for Hermione, as his dismissive attitude toward her concerns reflected not malicious intent, but the casual acceptance of elvish subjugation that characterized even the most progressive wizarding families. His argument that house elves enjoyed their work and would be insulted by offers of freedom revealed how completely wizarding culture had normalized the idea that some beings were naturally suited for servitude, making liberation efforts seem like misguided interference rather than moral necessity. The challenges that Hermione faced in recruiting members for S.P.E.W demonstrated the isolation that awaited anyone who questioned fundamental assumptions about wizarding society's organization, as even sympathetic individuals were reluctant to associate themselves with causes that might mark them as troublemakers or social radicals. Her initial membership consisted almost entirely of herself, with Harry and Ron providing reluctant support that was motivated more by friendship than genuine conviction about the importance of her cause. The strategic decision to focus her initial efforts on the Hogwarts house elves reflected both practical considerations about accessibility and idealistic assumptions about the universal desire for freedom and self-determination. Hermione believed that elves who were treated relatively well would be most receptive to messages about their right to better conditions and legal protections, failing to recognize that contentment with current circumstances might actually make them more resistant to change rather than more eager for improvement. Her first direct encounters with the Hogwarts kitchen elves revealed the complexity of relationships she had assumed were simple exploitation, as she discovered beings whose pride in their work was genuine rather than imposed, whose satisfaction with their roles seemed to contradict everything she believed about the psychology of oppressed populations. The elves' polite but firm rejection of her offers of assistance and liberation forced her to confront the possibility that her understanding of their needs might be incomplete or fundamentally flawed. The knitting campaign that became S.P.E.W's most notorious initiative represented both the height of Hermione's determination and the depths of her misunderstanding about house elf culture and psychology. Her decision to create clothes that would automatically free any elf who picked them up reflected her faith in the transformative power of liberation, while completely ignoring the trauma and displacement that unwanted freedom might cause. For beings whose entire identity was built around service to others, the woolen hats and socks that she scattered throughout Gryffindor Tower were crafted with meticulous attention to quality and durability, reflecting her belief that house elves deserved the finest things rather than the shabby treatment they typically received. Each item was knitted with love and hope, imbued through her careful work with intentions of kindness and respect that made her subsequent disappointment all the more bitter when her gifts were rejected rather than embraced. The house elves' refusal to clean Gryffindor Tower, once they discovered Hermione's clothing scattered throughout the common room, created exactly the kind of disruption she had hoped to avoid, as her well-intentioned activism made conditions worse for everyone involved, rather than improving the situations she sought to address. The elves' perception of her actions as insulting rather than liberating forced her to confront the possibility that freedom imposed without consent might be indistinguishable from oppression, regardless of the liberator's motivations. The cleaning boycott that resulted from her knitting campaign provided Hermione with her first practical lesson in the unintended consequences that could arise from activism that prioritized the advocate's moral satisfaction over the poitsection, genuine needs and preferences of those being helped. The accumulation of garbage, dust, and general disorder in Gryffindor Tower served as daily reminder that good intentions without understanding could create problems rather than solving them. Dobby's unique position as the only house elf at Hogwarts who actively desired freedom made him Hermione's most reliable ally in her liberation efforts, though even his support came with complications that revealed the isolation that freedom brought to elves who chose independence over traditional service relationships. His enthusiasm for wages, working conditions, and legal protections contrasted sharply with other elves' discomfort at his revolutionary attitudes, creating divisions within the Elvish community that Hermione had not anticipated or prepared to address. The other house elves' treatment of Dobby as eccentric at best and dangerous at worst demonstrated how completely the psychology of servitude had been internalized by Elvish culture, making those who embraced freedom seem like traitors to their own species, rather than pioneers of a better future. This rejection by his own people added another layer of tragedy to Dobby's situation, as liberation had cost him not just his place in wizarding society, but his acceptance within Elvish communities as well. Winky's response to S.P.E.W's message of liberation was perhaps the most heartbreaking for Hermione, as the former Crouch family elf's descent into alcoholism and despair after her dismissal provided concrete evidence that freedom without preparation or support could be more destructive than helpful. Winky's insistence that house elves were meant to serve, that liberation was shame rather than gift, challenged Hermione's fundamental assumptions about the universal desire for independence and self-determination. The complexity of Winky's situation forced Hermione to recognize that centuries of conditioning could not be overcome through simple legal changes or well-meaning activism. That true liberation required not just the removal of external constraints, but the psychological healing and cultural transformation that would allow former slaves to function effectively in roles they had never been prepared to fill. The broader wizarding community's reaction to S.P.E.W ranged from amusement to annoyance, with most adults treating Hermione's activism as youthful idealism that she would eventually outgrow rather than serious challenge to social structures that deserved thoughtful consideration. This patronizing dismissal was perhaps more frustrating than outright hostility, as it denied the legitimacy of her concerns while avoiding engagement with the moral arguments she presented. The Ministry of Magic's official position on house elf welfare was carefully neutral, acknowledging that improvements were theoretically desirable, while avoiding any concrete steps that might disrupt the economic relationships that made Elvish labor so valuable to wizarding society. The Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures treated S.P.E.W's proposals as administrative curiosities rather than urgent moral imperatives, filing her letters with bureaucratic efficiency while taking no meaningful action to address the issues she raised. The media coverage that S.P.E.W eventually attracted focused more on Hermione's youth and gender than on the substance of her arguments, trivializing her activism by presenting it as teenage rebellion rather than serious social reform movement. The few articles that appeared in wizarding publications emphasized the amusing aspects of her campaign while ignoring the legal and ethical questions that her research had identified and documented. The educational impact that S.P.E.W achieved, despite its limited practical success, was perhaps more significant than Hermione initially realized, as her activism forced conversations about house elf welfare that might never have occurred otherwise. Students who had never questioned their family's treatment of house elves found themselves thinking about the ethics of unpaid labor, while faculty members were compelled to defend or examine practices they had previously taken for granted. The long-term influence of Hermione's early activism extended far beyond Hogwarts, as her research and advocacy laid groundwork for the more sophisticated reform movements that would emerge after the war against Voldemort, demonstrated the courage and loyalty that house elves could display when they were given opportunities to choose their own paths. Her documentation of Elvish capabilities and her analysis of legal precedents provided resources that future advocates would build upon to achieve the practical changes that her initial efforts had been unable to accomplish. The personal growth that Hermione experienced through her work with S.P.E.W taught her valuable lessons about the difference between helping and imposing, between advocacy and paternalism, between fighting for justice and fighting to feel good about herself. These lessons would prove invaluable in her later career as a ministry official, where her understanding of the complexities involved in social reform would make her efforts more effective and her approaches more sensitive to the needs of those she sought to help. The relationship between S.P.E.W and Hermione's broader development as a leader and activist revealed how early failures could provide foundations for later success, as the mistakes she made in her initial advocacy taught her about the importance of listening to those she wanted to help, rather than assuming she understood their needs better than they did. Her evolution from crusader to collaborator reflected growing wisdom about the nature of social change and the patience required to achieve meaningful reform. The legacy of S.P.E.W as Hermione's first major independent initiative demonstrated both the power and the limitations of individual activism in addressing systemic injustices, showing how one person's moral awakening could plant seeds for larger movements while also revealing the structural changes that were necessary to transform good intentions into effective action. The organization's ultimate failure to achieve its stated goals was less important than its success in challenging assumptions and starting conversations that would continue long after its founder had moved on to other causes. The inspiration that other students drew from Hermione's example, even when they disagreed with her methods or conclusions, showed how moral courage could influence others to examine their own beliefs and behaviors, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate impact of specific campaigns or initiatives. The willingness to stand alone for unpopular causes, to endure ridicule and isolation for the sake of principles, became part of Hermione's character that would serve her well in the darker challenges that lay ahead. The foundation that S.P.E.W provided for Hermione's later work in magical creature rights was invaluable despite the organization's tactical failures, as her early experiences taught her about the complexities involved in cross-species advocacy and the importance of building relationships based on trust and mutual respect, rather than assumptions about what others needed or wanted. These lessons would make her post-war efforts more effective while honoring the dignity of those she sought to help rather than treating them as problems to be solved through external intervention. The magical institutions that existed beyond the familiar walls of Hogwarts harbored their own populations of house elves, each community shaped by the unique demands and cultural expectations of the organizations they served, creating variations in Elvish experience that ranged from enlightened cooperation to systematic exploitation that made even the worst pure-blood households seem benevolent by comparison. These diverse environments revealed the full spectrum of possibilities that existed within the framework of house elf servitude, demonstrating how institutional values and leadership philosophies could transform the same basic relationship into radically different lived experiences. The Magical Congress of the United States of America employed house elves in numbers that dwarfed most other magical institutions, their sprawling headquarters in the Woolworth Building requiring an invisible workforce of nearly 300 elves, whose contributions to daily operations remained as hidden from public view as the building itself was concealed from Muggle observation. The American approach to house elf management reflected the complex cultural attitudes that characterized MACUSA's relationship with all non-human magical beings, combining progressive rhetoric about equality and opportunity with practical policies that maintained strict hierarchical distinctions between species. The house elves, who worked as janitors within MACUSA's labyrinthine corridors, possessed detailed knowledge of every secret passage, hidden chamber, and classified area within the building, their cleaning responsibilities requiring access to spaces that even senior officials rarely entered. These elves moved through the halls of American magical power like ghosts, their presence so thoroughly ignored that they became privy to conversations and activities that shaped policy, affecting millions of magical beings throughout the continent. The messenger service that house elves provided within MACUSA demonstrated both their remarkable efficiency and the casual disregard with which their contributions were treated, as they transported sensitive documents and classified communications through magical means that exceeded the speed and security of any technological alternative. Their ability to appear instantly in any office, deliver their messages without being noticed by anyone except the intended recipient, and vanish again without leaving traces made them invaluable assets, whose importance was inversely related to the respect they received. The working conditions that MACUSA house elves endured were characterized by long hours, minimal rest, and complete invisibility that extended beyond mere lack of recognition to encompass active denial of their existence whenever convenient for their supervisors. Official documents and organizational charts made no mention of house elf contributions, while budget allocations included no provisions for their care or maintenance beyond the absolute minimum required to keep them functional. The hierarchies that developed within MACUSA's house elf population reflected both the complexity of government operations and the elves' own efforts to create meaning and dignity within their constrained circumstances. As senior elves, who had earned positions of responsibility over their fellows, found purpose in training newcomers and coordinating activities that their human supervisors were too busy or too indifferent to manage properly. The Circus Arcanus represented perhaps the most exploitative environment that house elves encountered anywhere in the magical world, transforming beings whose nature inclined them toward nurturing and protection into unwilling performers in spectacles designed to degrade and humiliate them for the entertainment of audiences who viewed their suffering as amusing rather than tragic. The circus's treatment of house elves revealed how easily the bonds of service could be perverted into instruments of abuse when those who held power lacked any meaningful constraints on their behavior. The house elves who were forced to perform in the circus's shows endured not just physical danger, but psychological torture that violated every instinct and preference that defined their species, compelled to act as objects of ridicule rather than respected contributors to meaningful endeavors. The hot dog vendor who served crowds while dressed in demeaning costumes experienced daily humiliation that was calculated to break his spirit while extracting maximum entertainment value from his degradation. The canon act that featured a house elf being shot across the circus arena represented the ultimate expression of callous disregard for elvish welfare, turning their natural magical resilience into justification for subjecting them to experiences that would kill ordinary beings, while treating their survival as proof that no real harm was being done. The elf who performed this stunt lived in constant fear, not just of death, but of the magical compulsions that made refusal impossible, even when every instinct screamed for self-preservation. The international variations in house elf treatment that became apparent through the circus's travels revealed how different magical cultures had developed their own approaches to managing elvish populations, with some societies maintaining traditional service relationships, while others had evolved toward more collaborative, or exploitative arrangements that reflected broader cultural values about power, hierarchy, and the proper treatment of magical beings. Durmstrang Institute's approach to house elf integration reflected the school's emphasis on magical strength and academic excellence, creating an environment where elves who demonstrated exceptional abilities could earn positions of significant responsibility, while those who failed to meet demanding standards faced consequences that British magical education would consider unthinkably harsh. The Northern European tradition of meritocratic hierarchy extended even to non-human populations, creating opportunities for advancement that were balanced by expectations of performance that brooked no excuses or accommodations. The house elves who worked in Durmstrang's kitchens and dormitories developed skills that were renowned throughout the magical world for their sophistication and reliability, their training emphasizing precision and innovation that transformed routine domestic magic into high art worthy of academic study. These elves took pride in achievements that were recognized and rewarded rather than simply expected, creating a culture of excellence that elevated their work beyond mere service into genuine contribution to the school's educational mission. The harsh climate that surrounded Durmstrang required house elves to develop specialized abilities for managing extreme weather conditions, creating warming charms that could function in temperatures that would defeat ordinary heating magic, while maintaining the delicate environmental controls that sophisticated magical education required. Their innovations in cold-weather domestic magic became legendary among their peers, techniques that were studied and adapted by Elvish communities throughout Northern Europe. Beauxbatons Academy's house elves benefited from the French magical community's appreciation for refinement and artistic achievement. Their work elevated to levels of aesthetic sophistication that transformed mundane tasks into expressions of cultural values that emphasized beauty, elegance, and attention to detail. The French approach to Elvish service emphasized collaboration between human and non-human magical beings in pursuit of shared artistic vision, rather than simple utilitarian efficiency. The elves who maintained Beauxbatons' legendary gardens and architectural marvels developed abilities that blurred the lines between domestic service and landscape artistry, their magic flowing through living systems to create environments that were simultaneously functional and breathtakingly beautiful. Their work was appreciated not just for its practical benefits, but for its contribution to the aesthetic experience that made Beauxbatons one of the most admired magical institutions in Europe. The culinary traditions that Beauxbatons house elves maintained reflected centuries of refinement in magical cuisine, their techniques incorporating elements of both French culinary artistry and Elvish magical innovation to create dining experiences that were celebrated throughout the magical world. These elves were recognized as artists in their own right, rather than merely servants who happened to cook. Their creations studied and emulated by magical chefs who understood that Elvish contributions to culinary art deserved recognition and respect. Street Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries employed house elves whose work demanded extraordinary precision and specialized knowledge, as their domestic magic was adapted to serve healing purposes that required understanding of both magical theory and medical practice that few beings possessed. The house elves who worked in the hospital's wards developed abilities that complemented and enhanced the work of trained healers, while providing comfort and care that pure medical treatment could not address. The cleaning and maintenance that hospital elves performed went far beyond simple housekeeping to encompass magical sterilization techniques that prevented the spread of magical diseases, ward maintenance that supported healing spells, and environmental management that created conditions optimal for recovery from various forms of magical injury and illness. Their work was literally life and death in its importance, yet their contributions were rarely acknowledged by the medical professionals whose success depended entirely on Elvish support. The specialized diets that hospital elves prepared for patients with different magical conditions required knowledge of both nutritional science and magical interaction effects that would challenge trained potioneers. Yet these elves developed expertise through practical experience that exceeded anything available in formal medical education. Their ability to create foods that supported healing while avoiding magical conflicts that could complicate treatment made them invaluable partners in patient care. The emotional support that hospital elves provided to patients and families went far beyond their official duties, as their natural empathy and desire to help others made them sources of comfort during times of crisis and uncertainty that human medical staff, focused on technical treatment issues, often could not address adequately. Their presence created atmospheres of warmth and caring that were themselves therapeutic, contributing to healing in ways that medical texts rarely acknowledged or measured. Gringotts Wizarding Bank's relationship with house elves was complicated by the institution's primary allegiance to goblin interests and values, creating an environment where elvish workers found themselves caught between the demands of goblin employers and the expectations of wizarding customers in ways that tested their diplomatic abilities and cultural adaptability. The goblins' own history, as marginalized magical beings, made them simultaneously more understanding of elvish perspectives and more determined to maintain their hard-won positions of authority and respect. The security applications that house elves provided within Gringotts went far beyond simple cleaning and maintenance to encompass magical surveillance and protection services that took advantage of their ability to move unnoticed through areas where more obvious security measures might alert potential thieves to the presence of defensive systems. Their work in maintaining the complex ward networks that protected the bank's vaults required technical expertise that few wizards possessed. The cultural tensions that existed between goblin and elvish approaches to work and social relationships created ongoing challenges for house elves employed by Gringotts, as they struggled to adapt their natural inclinations toward collaborative service to an environment that emphasized individual achievement and competitive advancement. The goblins' respect for skill and determination provided opportunities for elvish advancement that were rare in other magical institutions, but these opportunities came with expectations and pressures that many elves found difficult to navigate successfully. The private magical businesses that employed house elves created the most diverse working conditions imaginable, ranging from small family operations where elves were treated almost as business partners, to large commercial enterprises, where they were viewed as expendable resources whose welfare mattered only insofar as it affected productivity and profitability. These variations revealed how individual character and business philosophy could create radically different experiences for elves whose legal status remained essentially identical. The magical shops and restaurants that relied on house elf labor often developed reputations that were directly connected to the quality of treatment their elvish employees received, as customers could sense the difference between establishments where elves worked willingly and those where they were driven by fear and compulsion. The most successful magical businesses learned that investing in elvish welfare and job satisfaction produced returns that far exceeded the costs of providing better working conditions. The international magical trade networks that connected wizarding communities across continents relied heavily on house elf expertise for managing the complex logistics of transporting magical goods safely across vast distances while maintaining their properties and preventing dangerous interactions between incompatible magical items. These elves developed specialized knowledge of international magical law and customs regulations that made them invaluable assets in global commerce. The variations in legal protections and cultural expectations that house elves encountered when working for international businesses exposed them to treatment that ranged from enlightened cooperation to brutal exploitation, depending on which nation's laws and customs governed their working conditions. These experiences created elvish communities with international perspectives that were rare among magical beings, who were typically confined to single countries or regions throughout their lives. The entertainment industry's use of house elves in circuses, theatres, and other commercial spectacles represented some of the most problematic applications of elvish labor, as their magical abilities were exploited for profit, while their welfare was subordinated to audience demands for increasingly elaborate and dangerous performances. The power dynamics inherent in entertainment businesses made elves particularly vulnerable to abuse, as their value was measured entirely by their ability to generate audience reaction rather than their well-being or personal development. The magical research institutions that employed house elves in laboratory and library settings created environments where their natural curiosity and attention to detail could contribute to scientific advancement, though their contributions were rarely acknowledged in published papers or credited in patent applications. These elves often developed expertise in specialized areas of magical theory that rivaled or exceeded that of formally trained researchers, yet their knowledge was treated as institutional property rather than personal achievement. The governmental agencies beyond Makusa that employed house elves created bureaucratic hierarchies that were even more rigid and impersonal than private businesses, with elves serving as invisible infrastructure that made official operations possible while remaining completely excluded from policy discussions or decision-making processes that affected their own working conditions. The civil service protections that benefited human employees typically did not extend to house elves, leaving them vulnerable to arbitrary changes in management or budget priorities. The military applications of house elf abilities in various national magical defense forces created ethical dilemmas about the use of non-combatant beings in support roles that might expose them to dangers they had never chosen to accept, while their natural pacifism made them unsuitable for direct combat roles despite their considerable magical abilities. The intelligence-gathering potential of beings who could move unnoticed through any environment created temptations for military leaders who might be willing to exploit elvish loyalty for strategic advantage. The diplomatic services that various magical governments operated often relied on house elves for maintaining embassies and consulates in foreign countries, creating situations where elves found themselves representing their home nations while having no voice in the policies they were expected to support through their service. These elves developed sophisticated understanding of international relations and cultural differences that made them valuable informal advisors, though their insights were rarely sought or acknowledged by official diplomatic personnel. The educational institutions beyond the major magical schools that employed house elves created opportunities for elvish intellectual development that were rare elsewhere, as libraries, research centers, and specialized academies offered environments where curious elves could expand their knowledge while contributing to the preservation and advancement of magical learning. These institutions often developed more collaborative relationships with their elvish staff, recognizing that education benefited from diverse perspectives and experiences. The legacy of institutional house elf employment revealed both the potential for positive relationships between human and elvish communities and the systematic patterns of exploitation that characterized most such arrangements, creating a complex picture of progress and regression that would influence post-war reform efforts and shape discussions about magical creature rights for generations to come. The variations in treatment demonstrated that alternatives to traditional servitude were possible when institutions chose to prioritize elvish welfare alongside their own operational needs. The dawn that broke over Hogwarts on the 2nd of May in 1998 illuminated a castle transformed by battle, its ancient stones scarred by curses and its halls echoing with the aftermath of conflict that had tested every soul within its walls. Yet among the defenders who had stood against the forces of darkness, None had shown greater courage or clearer purpose than the house elves who had chosen to abandon centuries of enforced neutrality to fight for the values and people they had come to love through decades of faithful service. The sight of over 100 house elves charging into battle, led by Kreacher wielding a massive cleaver and crying out for vengeance in the name of Regulus Black, represented a turning point, not just in the war against Voldemort, but in the relationship between wizarding society and the magical beings who had served them so faithfully while receiving so little recognition or respect in return. Their participation in the final battle was voluntary, courageous, and decisive, proving beyond doubt that house elves possess not just magical power, but moral conviction that could inspire them to heroic action when circumstances demanded such sacrifice. The tactical contributions that house elves made to the Battle of Hogwarts extended far beyond their dramatic final charge, as their intimate knowledge of the castle's hidden passages and secret chambers allowed them to coordinate defensive efforts with precision that human fighters could never have matched, while their ability to move unseen through areas of intense combat made them ideal for rescue operations and strategic repositioning of resources and personnel. Their domestic magic, so long dismissed as mere household convenience, proved devastatingly effective in military applications, as they turned cooking knives into weapons that could penetrate magical defenses, transformed cleaning supplies into tactical advantages that confused and disoriented Death Eater forces, and used their deep understanding of the castle's infrastructure to deny enemy access to strategic positions while facilitating friendly movement through areas that conventional tactics would have found impassable. The aftermath of victory brought unprecedented attention to house elf contributions to the war effort, as survivors recounted stories of Elvish heroism that had received no recognition in official accounts of previous conflicts, creating public awareness of their capabilities and dedication that made traditional dismissal of their importance increasingly difficult to maintain. The wizarding press, never quick to acknowledge magical creature achievements, found themselves compelled to report on elvish bravery that had been witnessed by too many people to ignore or minimize. Kingsley Shacklebolt's elevation to the position of Minister for Magic brought to power a leader whose experiences during the war had given him first-hand knowledge of house elf capabilities and character, making him uniquely positioned to champion reforms that previous administrations had been too conservative or too indifferent to consider seriously. His background as an Auror had taught him to value competence and loyalty above social status, while his service in the Order of the Phoenix had shown him examples of elvish courage that demanded respect and recognition. The legislative agenda that Shacklebolt's administration pursued regarding magical creature rights was comprehensive and ambitious, addressing not just house elves, but all non-human magical beings who had suffered under discriminatory laws and practices that had been justified through prejudice rather than rational policy considerations. The House Elf Welfare Act of 1999 was the centerpiece of these reforms, establishing basic protections and rights that acknowledged elvish personhood while respecting their cultural preferences and individual choices about how to exercise their newfound freedoms. Hermione Granger's appointment to the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures represented both recognition of her long-time advocacy for magical creature rights and acknowledgement that effective reform required passionate commitment combined with practical understanding of the complexities involved in changing systems that had operated unchanged for centuries. Her experiences with S.P.E.W. had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of listening to those she sought to help, rather than imposing solutions based on assumptions about what they needed or wanted. The approaches that Hermione developed for implementing house elf welfare reforms reflected her hard-won wisdom about the difference between liberation and abandonment, as she worked to create systems that expanded Elvish choices while providing support and resources that would help them adapt to new opportunities without losing the cultural identity and social connections that gave their lives meaning and purpose. The establishment of wages for house elves who chose to accept them represented a revolutionary change that acknowledged their labor as valuable work, deserving of compensation, rather than mere fulfillment of natural obligations. Yet the implementation of this policy required careful attention to individual preferences and cultural sensitivities that made uniform approaches impossible and potentially counterproductive. The resistance that some house elves displayed toward wage labor reflected not false consciousness or internalized oppression, but genuine cultural values that found dignity in service freely given rather than compensation received, creating challenges for reformers who had to balance respect for Elvish autonomy with concerns about exploitation and economic justice that transcended individual choice to encompass systemic patterns of inequality. The successful integration of paid Elvish labor into magical institutions required development of new employment models that could accommodate Elvish preferences while meeting institutional needs, creating positions that were neither traditional servitude nor conventional employment, but something entirely new that reflected the unique characteristics and capabilities that house elves brought to their work. Hogwarts became a laboratory for these experiments in Elvish employment, as the school's existing positive relationship with its house elf population provided a foundation for implementing reforms that might have been impossible in more hostile environments. The administration under McGonagall's leadership demonstrated genuine commitment to treating Elvish welfare as essential to the school's mission rather than peripheral concern that could be addressed when convenient. The elves who chose to remain at Hogwarts under the new arrangements found themselves with unprecedented autonomy over their working conditions, schedules, and responsibilities, creating opportunities for personal development and creative expression that had been impossible under traditional servitude arrangements. Some embraced these changes enthusiastically, discovering talents and interests that previous constraints had kept hidden, while others found the transition challenging and required extensive support to adapt to their expanded options. The career diversification that became possible as legal and social barriers to Elvish employment began to fall created opportunities for house elves to pursue interests and develop skills that went far beyond traditional domestic service, though the process of exploring these new possibilities required courage and persistence that not all elves possessed or desired to develop. The magical healing profession began incorporating house elves whose natural empathy and magical sensitivity made them exceptionally effective at providing comfort and support to patients dealing with both physical and emotional trauma, creating new roles that utilized their traditional nurturing abilities while acknowledging their professional competence and individual expertise. Educational institutions discovered that house elves could serve as valuable teaching assistants and research collaborators, their different perspectives on magical theory and their practical experience with complex enchantments providing insights that traditional academic training often missed or undervalued. The integration of Elvish knowledge into formal magical education enriched curricula while providing career opportunities that satisfied Elvish intellectual curiosity. The business and commercial applications of Elvish talents expanded rapidly as entrepreneurs recognized the competitive advantages that could come from partnerships with beings whose magical abilities exceeded those of many trained wizards, creating enterprises that succeeded through collaboration rather than exploitation, while providing Elvish partners with economic independence and professional recognition. The artistic communities that emerged around Elvish creative expression revealed talents that centuries of domestic focus had kept hidden, as elves discovered abilities in sculpture, music, literature, and other fields that had nothing to do with cooking or cleaning, but everything to do with the aesthetic sensibility and attention to detail that had made their domestic work so exceptional. The gradual acceptance of elvish participation in magical society beyond traditional service roles required changes in social attitudes that went beyond legal reforms to encompass fundamental reconsiderations of what magical citizenship meant and who deserved full participation in the wizarding world's cultural, economic, and political life. The challenges that accompanied these transformations were significant and ongoing, as both human and elvish communities struggled to adapt to relationships that had no historical precedents, creating friction and misunderstandings that required patience and goodwill from all parties to resolve successfully. The generational differences that emerged within elvish communities reflected the varying impacts that reform had on elves of different ages and backgrounds. As younger elves who had grown up with expanded opportunities approached their futures differently than older elves whose identities had been formed under traditional servitude arrangements. The educational programs that were established to help house elves develop literacy, numeracy, and other skills that had been denied them under previous systems created opportunities for intellectual growth, while also revealing the extent of potential that had been wasted through centuries of systematic exclusion from formal learning opportunities. The psychological support services that became available to elves dealing with the trauma of past mistreatment or the stress of adapting to freedom addressed needs that had been ignored for generations, helping individuals heal from damage that had been considered normal and inevitable, rather than preventable and treatable. The legal protections that were gradually extended to cover house elves provided recourse for those who faced discrimination or exploitation, while also creating frameworks for resolving disputes between elvish workers and their employers that did not depend on traditional power relationships or magical compulsions. The international cooperation that developed around house elf welfare issues created networks for sharing best practices and coordinating reform efforts across national boundaries, as progressive, magical governments worked together to address problems that transcended local jurisdictions and cultural differences. The research initiatives that were launched to better understand elvish psychology, culture, and capabilities produced knowledge that had been actively suppressed or simply ignored under previous regimes, creating foundations for more effective and respectful policies while correcting centuries of misinformation and prejudice. The economic impacts of elvish liberation were complex and sometimes controversial, as traditional arrangements that had provided free labor to wizarding households and institutions were replaced by systems that required actual compensation and respect for worker preferences, creating costs that some organizations found difficult to absorb. The cultural preservation efforts that accompanied reform initiatives sought to maintain elvish traditions and values while adapting them to new circumstances, ensuring that liberation did not result in the loss of cultural identity that had sustained elvish communities through centuries of adversity. The success stories that emerged from elvish liberation efforts provided inspiration and practical models for other magical creatures seeking better treatment and expanded opportunities, creating momentum for broader reforms that addressed systemic inequalities throughout magical society rather than focusing exclusively on house elf issues. The continuing challenges that reform efforts faced included resistance from conservative elements within wizarding society, who viewed changes in traditional relationships as threats to established order, as well as practical difficulties in implementing complex policy changes across diverse institutions with varying resources and commitment levels. The long-term vision that guided post-war reform efforts encompassed not just immediate improvements in elvish welfare, but fundamental transformation of magical society into a more inclusive, an equitable community that recognized the dignity and potential of all magical beings, regardless of their species, background, or traditional social position. The legacy of the Battle of Hogwarts in inspiring these changes demonstrated how crisis could create opportunities for progress that might never have emerged under normal circumstances, as the shared experience of fighting for survival and common values created bonds that transcended traditional prejudices and hierarchical assumptions. The hope that sustained reform efforts through periods of difficulty and setbacks was grounded in evidence that positive change was possible when people of goodwill worked together toward shared goals, that centuries of injustice could be addressed through persistent effort and genuine commitment to principles of equality and mutual respect. As our journey through the hidden world of house elves draws to its gentle close, let your mind rest upon the greatest magic of all, the transformation of understanding. In the quiet hours before dawn, when even the most dedicated house elf finally rests, we remember that true nobility lies not in being served, but in serving with dignity, respect, and choice. The tiny hands that prepared 1,000 meals, the loyal hearts that kept family secrets, the brave spirits that chose freedom or service on their own terms, all remind us that greatness comes in the smallest packages. May you dream of warm kitchens filled with laughter, of magical feasts prepared with love, of freedom earned through courage, and of respect given freely to those who have given so much. Sleep now, knowing that in the wizarding world and our own, the greatest magic happens when we see the worth in every soul, no matter how small. Sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow with a deeper appreciation for all those who serve others with quiet dignity and unwavering love.